listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Thousands and thousands and thousands of Canadian truckers have descended on Ottawa, cunningly organized by the Russians. President Putin is allegedly one of the drivers. They're going to weaponize them and place them along the Canadian-US border. As a matter of fact, across the border, people might be beginning to think about a convoy from California all the way to Washington, D.C. All of that is rubbish, of course, except the first bit. The Canadians are revolting, something I never thought I'd hear myself say. And, of course, the United States is seriously proposing, that Russia should accept thousands and thousands and thousands of heavily armed NATO troops on its borders. Ha! They obviously don't know Vlad. And, of course, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau has donned blackface disguise and fled from the Canadian capital for his safety. Isn't it funny how Liberals always end up as the most tyrannical, authoritarian people on the planet? They're even trying to cancel Joe Rogan of Spotify. Who he, Ed? I've never seen or heard Joe Rogan, but I will defend to the death his right to be on Spotify. That and so much more is coming up over the next 3 hours on this, the mother of all talk shows. So fasten your seatbelts. This is rock and roll radio with pictures.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
My editor, who's very much older than me, has just accused me of showing my age. It's Justin Trudeau. I'm glad that his father's not alive to hear me make that mistake. Viva Fidel! The Canadian Prime Minister, though, has taken flight from Ottawa as the entire city has become log-jammed, a kind of gigantic truck. I don't know, a pile-up. There's no room for any more trucks in Ottawa. What a great idea. I wish I'd thought of that. Thousands and thousands of Canadian truckers have taken to the highways of Canada, and they are many and big, in order to demonstrate their rejection of the idea of the state forcing you to take a vaccination. This forcible medication would be difficult to justify in any circumstances. Certainly, I have always opposed it. But where it's an experimental vaccine that hasn't gone through the usual rigmarole before a vaccine is finally passed fit for human purpose, it's clearly ridiculous and entirely counterproductive. I speak as a triple-jabbed man myself because I trust my doctor and she told me to take it. But if Boris Johnson had passed a law forcing me to take it, well, that would quite likely have made me stand up and refuse. Do you see where I'm going here? And it's always the Liberals that turn out to be the most authoritarian people on the planet. Take a look at social media and you can see the witch hunting of Djokovic, the hatred of the truckers. Canadian Broadcast Corporation, CBC, actually said on its flagship news program that Vladimir Putin was behind the Canadian truckers. I did find and post a picture of President Putin driving one of the Canadian trucks. But whilst he might be on the convoy, he definitely didn't organize it. That was homegrown Canadian work. But the idea that hard-working, blue-collar men and women, truck drivers, should be smeared as Russian assets because they're standing up for their freedom to decide whether or not to take a vaccine tells you almost everything that you need to know about the current state of left versus right, where cross-dressing, forgive me, has become the order of the day. That which was right is now left, that which is left is now right. I said almost enough to sum up where we are today. But the Spotify row over Joe Rogan surely takes the biscuit. Now, I'm one of the few people on the planet, it seems, who has never set eyes on Joe Rogan or heard his voice in any form or medium, although many of my friends say that he's absolutely terrific. But though I cannot testify to that, I am prepared to say that if Spotify cancelled Joe Rogan, I'm cancelling Spotify. But Spotify so far are standing up to the pressure. Mind you, it was first applied by somebody called Neil Young, who last had a hit record in the 1970s. He said, it's Joe Rogan or me. And Spotify said, well, in that case, we'll take Joe Rogan. But then Joni Mitchell, of all people, the poster girl of liberalism, the California Canadian icon of freedom, she took her music off in protest at Spotify's refusal to remove Joe Rogan. And now they're queuing up to threaten that they will withdraw their music from Spotify. Except James, is it Blunt or Hunt? James Blunt. He was beautiful once. He threatened to download more music, upload more music onto Spotify if they dared to cancel Joe Rogan. I'm going to buy some Blunt music, although I was never his biggest fan. But you see where I'm going with this. This kind of political cross-dressing has now become utterly bewildering. Just last weekend, on my drive down from Scotland to London, in the course of my journey, I discovered that hundreds of people were earnestly discussing whether or not I had a mean and harsh attitude to refugees and maybe a rampant transphobe. Neither allegation of which, of course, is true, but serious people discuss this and then block you and cancel you because somebody said you were a transphobe or that you were against refugees. This kind of cancel culture has grown grotesquely quickly, and it's gone far. We've got a poll on it. Should all artists boycott Spotify until they sack Joe Rogan? A, yes. B, no. Please vote now on my Twitter account or on my YouTube channel or on my Telegram channel. That's not, of course, all that we're going to be discussing this evening. We'll be talking in a minute to one of the very brightest young men I've come across in many years. He is the youngest RT correspondent in Moscow. He's American. He'll continue to be the youngest for some time. As I was once, I tell him myself, I was once the youngest ever everything. I've got the newspaper cuttings that show me as the youngest ever this, that, and the next thing. He won't remain the youngest forever, but he is so good I predict a very big future for him. We're going to be talking to him regularly. From Moscow, this time about Ukraine and whether or not there's going to be a war. It seems to me that the fox has been shot. It's been shot not just by Russia, which has maintained resolutely from the beginning that it has absolutely no intention of invading Ukraine, but it's been shot again from the president of Ukraine. If he's not careful, Joe Biden is going to regime change him and replace him, per the Sunday Times, with a better president that is more friendly towards the United States. The president of Ukraine says this has all been a disaster for Ukraine. It's wiped billions of the share price of Ukraine. It's got people fleeing from what has now become a Potemkin state. When Ukraine became independent, it had a population of 52 million. That's more than 30 years ago. Its population now should be, on that basis, 70 million. But it's actually now 33 million and falling. And people are packing and running, including the diplomats of the countries that are determined to provoke a war to every last Ukrainian. They want to fight Russia with the blood of the Ukrainian people. And certainly the wreckage that they have wreaked now on the Ukrainian economy is plain to see. If you don't have to believe me, you can believe the Ukrainian government themselves. We'll be talking also about the 50th anniversary, which falls on this very day, of the mass murder of 14 unarmed civilian marchers on a civil rights march in Derry. 50 years have gone by. 14 people were shot dead. I think 26 or 36 people in total were shot. But 14 of them were shot dead in the United Kingdom. Imagine if it had happened in London. Imagine if it had happened in Manchester. 14 civilians shot dead. Of course, the murderers were in the uniform of the British Army, the parachute regiment, to be precise. We even know who the murderers were, although Boris Johnson has now made it impossible for the surviving murderers ever to be brought to justice before the courts, even though the British state, in the Savile inquiry and in David Cameron's, I think, heartfelt apology, has accepted absolute responsibility for murder. The murder of Irish people who were British citizens and were shot dead by the British Army for the crime of demanding civil rights on a peaceful march. Now, of course, the state lied comprehensively about it and appointed the liar-in-chief, Lord Justice Widgery, to falsely conclude in the Widgery inquiry that shots were fired from the demonstration, casting doubt on whether the 14 dead Irish people had been carrying weapons, had fired weapons. All of it was a lie, a bright, shining lie, a gigantic lie. It was murder most foul in broad daylight on television of innocent, unarmed protesters. It wasn't even a boisterous protest. It was more like the vigil that happened in Derry this day, on which thousands took to the streets to remember the carnage that day and to express their support and sympathy, empathy with the families of those who were cruelly murdered that day. But it happened in my lifetime, I watched it on my television. I watched as Widgery whitewashed the massacre. And I watched when David Cameron came to the dispatch box to respond to the findings of the Savile inquiry, to declare that all of the British narrative that had gone before had been a pack of lies, and that these innocent, unarmed people had all been murdered in plain sight by the British Army. He expressed an apology and compensation of sorts, as if you can be compensated for your father or your brother, your son, being shot down dead in the street on Bloody Sunday, 50 years ago today. We'll be talking about that also. We'll be talking about the United States with Garland Nixon, where all kinds of wheels are turning. It is self-evidently clear, clearer with every press conference, that President Biden shouldn't be left with any but his coat buttons that he might press accidentally. Where it is increasingly abundantly clear that you would not send Joe Biden out for a loaf. Abundantly clear that it is bordering on, if not over the border, of elder abuse to pretend that this man is running the most powerful, violent country on the earth. For that is what it is. But here's the rub. If Joe Biden's not running America, who is? It's certainly not the Vice President, Kamala Harris, whose ratings are plummeting lower and lower every week, and are far lower even than the semi-senile President Biden. Nobody's trusting Kamala Harris. In fact, she wants out. She's begun to brief the media that she never really wanted to be in the Washington bubble and is looking for ways out. So if not Biden and not Harris, who is running America? Well, a clue might be in the increased desperation to find a war to force other people to fight. And that isn't going well. NATO is splintering apart in front of our eyes. Germany wants nothing to do with a military confrontation with Russia, maybe because they have some experience of that matter. France wants nothing to do with it. As a matter of fact, France and Germany and Ukraine and Russia are about to have their own four-party talks, cutting out the United States, because increasingly it is obvious to more and more European countries that the United States is ready to fight wars to the last drop of their blood. The Slovakian president said that he'd withdraw all Slovak troops from NATO if war broke out at US behest in the Ukraine. And he wasn't the only one. The Bulgarians have made it clear. No, we're all right, Joe. Don't send any American troops over here. We don't need them and we don't want them. It is beginning to be clear that the strategic decision to exclude Russia from the European security architecture upon the fall of the Soviet Union, so that they could still have an enemy to justify their presence and their spending on weapons, was a great mistake. As I said here last week, Russia is a European, Christian, capitalist country. There is no reason whatsoever for it to be the enemy of other European, Christian, capitalist countries. No reason except the determination of the United States to exclude Russia for its own geopolitical purposes. But the law of unintended consequences, as it often does, has kicked in. The US allies in Europe are beginning to question the value of the European-United States relationship. And Russia has grown ever closer to China, where the sun is very definitely rising. The Chinese are kickboxing while we are tickboxing. Discuss. Over the next 3 hours, you'll have plenty of opportunity because this is the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
Peter says the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really. And Yoda says, love the show. Best entertainment and education on the airwaves.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Now, I threw out some controversial stuff there. If you want to respond, here's how you do it. If you're in the United Kingdom, here's the phone number. And remember, it's absolutely free to call. 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. And if you're in the United States or Canada, if you're a trucker in Canada, your telephone call will be pure gold. But don't come on speaking Russian. If you're in the United States or Canada, the number is +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. It also is toll free, absolutely free of charge. You can email the show, of course, at onair@moats.tv. I see that our Moats TV Twitter account went over 10,000 yesterday. Congratulations to those involved in that. If you're not following Moats TV on Twitter, please do. There's no point in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of you just following me. You need to follow my show also. And you can do that on Twitter. Now, look, we're launching a brand new, absolutely groundbreaking podcast series tonight. You won't want to miss that. It's called Maxwell the Monster. Which Maxwell? Wait and see. And at 8:30, you're going to hear all about it. I won't spoil the surprise. Stay tuned, please, for that. Now, our first guest of the evening, I've already given him a big build-up. I'll not repeat it. He's a very clever, smart young man from the United States, but coming to us from Moscow, where he works for RT. His name is Donald Korter, and I welcome him now. Donald, welcome for the first time, but not the last, I think, to the mother of all talk shows. Now, in my opening remarks, I implied, more than implied, explicitly stated that neither Russia nor Ukraine want a war. It seems that it's the United States and its vassals, particularly the United Kingdom, that are really pushing the envelope on all this. Is that how it looks to you in Moscow?
Hey there, George. Well, thanks a lot for inviting me on the show again. It's always a pleasure. Yeah, I would say it does look like that. I mean, I heard your introductory statement. I thought you hit the nail right on the head when you said that, a lot of NATO countries, leaders of NATO countries are saying they're not ready to commit to some sort of armed conflict in Ukraine. It sounds crazy to a lot of people, and I'm sure they're no exception. And, there are European leaders who are saying that they're not going to allow their militaries to participate in such in such an engagement that is obviously, part of the foreign policy of the United States. And that much, I think, is clear and evident by the fact that NATO said there will be no dedication of NATO troops in Ukraine to fight some sort of war. And it all ties into this sort of myth that the United States has forged around what's going on in East Ukraine, and that the Kiev government has also said as a willing partner in this attempt to basically put pressure on Russia, if you will, that everyone in East Ukraine and these breakaway provinces are just, Russian occupiers or something. I've been there many times. I'm filming a documentary film right there, and I didn't see any Russian occupation when I went there. We interviewed normal people as well as the administrations that are right now in charge of the country. They're locals there,
Well, if they can organize a gigantic truck cavalcade in Canada, it's not beyond Russia's capability to have done that, but they didn't. And there's a sense of unreality about it all. I heard on the BBC today sonorously announced that Boris Johnson was going to double the number of British troops sent to Eastern Europe. In fact, it's Estonia only. But when you drill down, you discover it's doubled from 800 soldiers to 1,500 soldiers. Now, they keep telling us, although the number often varies, that Russia has 120,000 soldiers in Ukraine, on the border, rather, with Ukraine. And so there's a bit of the sort of flea and the elephant about it all. I mean, the only people who could fight Russia is America. The Italian armed forces are not going to fight Russia. The Dutch armed forces, if they have them, are not going to fight Russia. So do American people know that if this becomes a shooting war, it's them that will be fighting Russia, nobody else?
Well, as an American, I mean, I've been living in Russia for around 4 years now, so I've been away from home for a little while. But I can tell you as an American, when things like this happened in the past, I mean, when we saw the Iraq war or the bombing of Libya with the death of Muammar Gaddafi, as an American who was in the United States, who had never traveled abroad before, I mean, the kind of stuff the media tells us and what the government is telling us, it really seems like, just all of the free world is on board for this kind of stuff. But, I really got a different perspective when I moved to Russia, because I saw how, Russians relate to this stuff. And I had closer exposure to European media, and it's not so black and white. I mean, a lot of European countries, they're not really into this idea of starting trouble with Russia, especially because Europe is seriously reliant on Russian gas to solve this energy crisis that's going on. I mean, the United States wants to ship more super expensive liquefied natural gas to Europe when there's there's Nord Stream 2, there's the Russian pipelines that are going to send natural gas to Europe at a way cheaper price. And, when you have to make a choice between those two for Europe, it's not so clear as the United States wants to make it out to be. It's not just between, freedom and authoritarianism. This is just some fake dichotomy. And I think a lot of Europeans know that, especially Germans. The German government seems to not be so fond of what the United States and the UK, like you said, seem to be doing in Ukraine. I mean, you mentioned that Boris Johnson wanted to double the amount of UK troops near Russia's border. That came not so long after Biden's plans to possibly send more U.S. troops to near the Russian border were announced. And of course, it's also the U.S. and the U.K. that are sending the most, what they call defensive and also lethal aid to Ukraine. It's most of it's coming from the United States and the U.K.
Lethal aid, it's got a ring to it, that I must say. There always seems to be a pipeline in these stories. From Afghanistan to the Ukraine, Germany, Russia. How much of this is about forcing Europe to cut itself off from Russian gas and choose instead the more expensive, more environmentally unfriendly liquid gas from the United States?
I think that's been one of the core causes for years. I mean, throughout, even from before Euromaidan happened in 2014, this was a sore point between the United States and Russia. The United States wanted a hold on those energy markets. I mean, we look at the invasion of Iraq, right? Oil was involved there. We look at the bombing of Libya. It's all connected to the energy markets, and this really is no exception. The United States is basically its one selling point on its liquefied natural gas is that Europe's going to be buying from, the good guys, the guys who are not trying to hold Europe hostage, as they say in Washington. But, Russia's just saying, we've got gas. It's a lot cheaper. We can offer to you at a reasonable price. And especially during a time when, there's an energy crisis. And I would say the reason for that energy crisis, a lot of that has to do with European countries, some of the main European countries jumping the gun on green energy policies and kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, undoubtedly, and that's, of course, most acute in Germany, where nuclear energy was thrown out with the bathwater in a spasm of greenery, leaving them dependent for 50% of their energy requirements on gas. And Britain, which once led the world on nuclear energy development, is in very real danger of doing the same thing. Now, let me ask you this. You don't speak for Russia any more than I do. But as a journalist and broadcaster, let me ask you what you think. Russia, I think we both agree, Russia isn't going to invade Ukraine, but it will make what they call military technical moves elsewhere in the near abroad and in the far abroad to answer the refusal of the United States to even acknowledge properly, let alone accede to, the principal Russian security concerns, which are membership of NATO for more and more countries in its backyard and bordering it, particularly Georgia and the Ukraine. If the West will not rule out membership for these two countries, Russia is going to respond. They say on the military technical level. What do you think they mean by that?
Well, in my opinion, I've been following the story really closely. And one of the things that started to really pop into the media, specifically after the American ambassador to Moscow, John Sullivan, gave America's answer to Russia's request for security guarantees, a proposal for security guarantees, like you said, so that NATO doesn't expand into Ukraine and Georgia. Right after the United States officially basically rejected those proposals, we saw a lot of talk about how Russia is now, having talks with countries in Latin America, specifically Cuba and Venezuela, about closer military cooperation. We don't exactly know what that means yet, but a lot of people are calling this the new Cuban Missile Crisis. And if Russia has no way to diplomatically deal with this situation, it's possible that the only way that they'll be able to defend their interests is through some sort of deterrence by evening the odds, perhaps putting their own military or weapons in countries like Cuba or Venezuela that are right on the United States doorstep. I mean, it is important to note that Russia did respond to these accusations, saying that they're not thinking of anything like that, specifically because they don't want to compromise the possibility of, they were talking about Cuba, of normalizing relations with the United States. Personally, I don't think there's going to be any normalization of relations between Cuba and the United States. I think the United States will not rest until that government is overthrown, unfortunately. But that's the Russian position. We could see a turnaround, because there will be closer cooperation between Russia and these Latin American allies that Russia has.
And what about Belarusia? As the name suggests, essentially the Belarus and Russian people are the same people. Is there any possibility, do you think, of Belarus joining the Russian Federation?
I don't really think so, just because they already actually, the relationship the Belarusian government has with the Russian one is already very open. I mean, for example, Russians can travel to Belarus without even going through a border patrol. They have a visa-free regime. They can go whenever they want. And there's a lot of things that, there's a lot of things that are made very easy for Belarusians trying to go to Russia and back and forth. I don't really see why either country would want to integrate. I mean, we definitely see that after what happened with Lukashenko and the liberal protests, the potential color revolution that was attempted not so long ago, Lukashenko was obviously working closer with Vladimir Putin, and that much was seen when there was an attempted color revolution in Kazakhstan, when the CSTO went in there on a peacekeeping mission, and the government eventually got everything under control. We saw negotiations, or not negotiations, but like cooperative talk between the Belarusian government and the Russian government. I think they're going to see eye to eye, throughout the whole Ukrainian conflict. Basically, Belarus does not want another NATO or even just pro-Western government on its doorstep, and Russia doesn't either. So I don't know if they're going to be integrating. I don't know if there's any economic reason for that, but they're definitely going to be working in close cooperation, even closer than before these protests started in Belarus just a couple of years ago, or last year.
On the other hand, in eastern Ukraine, Russia has said that its citizens that live there can join the Russian military if they choose and access Russian benefits, state benefits. How significant a development is that?
Well, I think it's a significant development, and I think it all started when this conflict broke out. The Lugansk and Lugansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic declared independence from Ukraine, and their electrical and water systems were connected to grids that were controlled by Kiev, and the Kiev government shut them down. So these people were without electricity and clean water for a while, basically until Russian humanitarian convoys came to help them. That was the main help from Russia. And ever since then, the Russian government has done more and more to help the people of this region. They don't recognize these provinces as part of Russia or even as independent people's republics, but they do recognize that a lot of people living there, probably they would even consider the vast majority of people living there, are ethnically Russian. And so the Russian government in the Russian Federation feels an obligation to help them. And like you said, more and more benefits from the Russian government are becoming available to people from those regions. It's become a lot easier for people from Lugansk and Donetsk to get Russian citizenship if they so choose. That was after Vladimir Putin signed off on that just a couple of years ago. So, and while they do have their own passport systems, they're able to travel into the Russian Federation freely, even with their own Lugansk and Donetsk passports. So, it's kind of like a similar situation as to what happened with, I would say, South Ossetia after the Georgia conflict.
Finally, I said finally, but I really mean it this time. Once Putin's finished with the Canadian trucker convoys. What next for him? He seems very relaxed, quiet even, about it all. It's Lavrov that does the heavy lifting on the international stage. I would have thought that this crisis has strengthened Putin's position in Russia and indeed internationally.
I would say so as well, because, the one thing that Vladimir Putin right now can pride himself on is that Russia's a relatively stable country. I mean, I've been living here for a long time. I lived in the United States for most of my life. And it's like almost immediately after I moved to Russia, I saw that, there's a lot less social divisions here, and there's a lot less social instability than there is in the United States, which is supposed to be the greatest country in the world, according to what we were told as kids, So, watching what has been happening on the TV, what's going on in Europe and the United States, and then seeing what's going on in Russia, Russian people see the country they're living in as a stable place. And, a lot of that can be attributed to Vladimir Putin's administration.
Donald, thanks for making your debut on the mother of all talk shows this evening. Very good to see you again. Now, this is a question for the history buffs. Can I move Sir Keir Starmer out of the way? He's beginning to annoy me. He just sits there like a log. He sits there like a log. He says nothing, does nothing. He's a block of wood. This is a question for the history buffs. In 1661, on this day, Oliver Cromwell was executed. What was highly unusual about it? A, he was already dead. B, he was insane. And C, he was unconscious. Unconscious. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
All talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, I shouldn't have laughed. I'm not a fan of Oliver Cromwell for religious, historical reasons. But it is odd. Only the British could do this, I think. I'm not aware of anyone else who's done this. On this day in 1661, they dug up Oliver Cromwell from his grave. He had died 2 years previously. He was dug up, hanged in chains, and then beheaded. But he was already 2 years dead. He was a skeleton. And here's the PS that I used to tell visitors that I was showing round Parliament. His head was put on a spike outside the St. Stephen's entrance to the House of Commons, one which my next guest and I have walked through 10,000 times. It was put on a spike at St. Stephen's entrance, but overnight it was nicked. It was stolen. So somewhere in England, it's never been recovered, somewhere in England, the head of Oliver Cromwell, which had been cut off when he was 2 years dead from natural causes, exists. Maybe it'll pop up on eBay one day. My next guest might know where it is. He knows lots of things. He was my parliamentary colleague for many years, and we worked together also in television. He was a Liberal Democrat, but he's better now. Yes, it's Lembit Opik. Lembit, thanks for joining us. You're looking wonderful.
Feel good. I've got a use for that spike, though, for one or two people, but I'll not go any further.
Now, the proximate reason for my inviting you this evening was to talk about Partygate because, well, how shall I put this? You like a party yourself. Were you shocked to learn that Downing Street had become a kind of, well, I was going to say bordello, but there's no evidence of that. But it's become a kind of, party. Were you shocked?
Nothing could have surprised me less, George. The only thing that really surprised me was the fact it took so long for people to find out. The rumours were going around, you must have heard them as well, that all these things were taking place. But then he made a big mistake, didn't he, Boris Johnson? He got rid of the man who knew where all the skeletons were buried, not just Oliver Cromwell. So when you cross Dominic Cummings, who arguably he shouldn't have employed in the first place, you're going to get your comeuppance. Now, it's never been proved that Dominic Cummings is behind these revelations, but I don't think you have to be a genius to work out what might be the motivation.
Well, he did leave with a cardboard box. And I remember thinking to myself when I saw that picture, I bet there's lots of evidence in that cardboard box.
He just had to know that a few little USB sticks and maybe a few photographs, as we've now found out, might possibly have found their way into the media from a disgruntled former employee by way of Cummings. Now, let's remember that Boris was warned about Dominic Cummings long before, certainly informally, but he chose to go that path. And even that wasn't necessarily the killer fact here. The fact is that he actually conducted all of these activities, knowing that potentially there could be a spy in the camp. Let's face it, there were 30 or 40 people in his garden. How would he think that this
I think that's the bull point, really, Lembit. That's just stupidity. I mean, in this day and age, you can't do, people like you and I, kind of semi-retired from public life, even we wouldn't do certain things in big enough company with people that we couldn't be sure of, that they're not taking pictures or recording with their phones I mean, how it didn't occur in the depth of the first COVID lockdown, us having a jamboree here in the garden of Downing Street might be leaked.
Yeah, you're so right. 3 huge unforced errors by Boris Johnson. The first one is to make what I thought were actually quite impressive speeches, quite statesmanlike speeches at the time, but at the very same time be violating the rules he was telling us to follow. Second error, and I didn't realise how big this was at the time, is to legislate. Everyone has broken the rules with the best of intent. You just couldn't help doing it sometimes. But he did it in this way. He should have said to the country, I'm not going to bring the law in, let's do this together. And then, of course, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party was too dumb to take that line themselves. I very much agree with what you said, by the way, about him, albeit potentially in jest. And then there's this third point. The third point is that Boris thought he could get away with it. There might have been a way out if he hadn't shown that level of self-assurance. But those 3 things together, I think, mean that it's double fault, to use a tennis term, and he has to take the hit.
Well, it's this week, I presume, we'll see 50 Shades of Grey, Sue Gray. Is he going to get a lashing, or will he get off lightly?
Well, if he doesn't get a lashing from Sue Gray, my personal view is Sue Gray therefore undermines her own credibility. Because in the court of public opinion, Boris is already guilty. And the unfunny part about this is, with 150,000 dead people, or we can argue about the figures, but certainly many thousands of dead people, most of us know someone who died from COVID. And a lot of people couldn't even have a proper funeral. My former agent, Terry Mills, died of COVID, and we couldn't go to his funeral. And other people couldn't have their weddings and everything else cancelled. Boris just carried on regardless. And if Sue Gray really accepts that all you have to do to fool the Prime Minister into thinking a party's a meeting is wear a tie and turn up with all the booze in a suitcase, in that case, perhaps even if he was to get off lightly here, he wouldn't really have the common sense to govern. So I think that Sue Gray's just got to say, come on the balance of probability, he's guilty, but we'll find out. The one really interesting thing here is, George, you were just talking about Ukraine. He's trying to look like a statesman now, but it's a bit late, Boris. You should have been doing that beforehand, rather than just saying, oh, look over there, and let's hope that the Partygate thing goes away.
Although there is the potential get out of the police activity. Cressida Dick, the head of the Metropolitan Police, although it's all very incestuous, isn't it? Cressida Dick is the head of the Metropolitan Police, and she's appointed her wife to lead the investigation. And as many people believe, that she should have been forced to resign for actually, I believe she should never have been appointed, but she's faced calls for her own resignation, but Boris has loyally stood by her. Many people think she's repaying the favour, and she's appointed her wife to do the investigation.
It does seem to me that something absolutely smells dodgy here, because what on earth was the rationale for saying, oh, well, Sue Gray can't publish her report because the police are doing an investigation? Are we expecting a jury trial? Because there's no other reason for doing that. They wouldn't have done it for anybody else. Why didn't they take this approach when Matt Hancock was caught rather red-handed? Why did Boris then say it was right for Matt Hancock to resign? So we've got this total contradiction. And I think that it's been a terrible error there. And perhaps it's because of the repaid favours. I don't know. But the two things are completely separate. You've got the Sue Gray report. You've got the police investigation. And if Sue Gray doesn't report this week, he might think this is going to disappear. But here's the problem. If he's lied, he's broken the ministerial code, and he said last Wednesday, well, it applies to him as well. So if he lied, he has to go. It's simple. There's no debate. He has to hand the resignation in to himself.
If it's concluded that he lied, I'm not sure that she will so conclude. And the police investigation is into something that you get a fixed penalty notice for. It's not even a criminal conviction. It's like getting a traffic ticket. You pay it, and it's then wiped. So how that can hold up an investigation in Whitehall is very difficult to understand.
As I recall, Boris actually got an order against him for not paying council tax. It's a CCJ, I think, county court judgment against him. He didn't resign. He's still got to be Prime Minister. So it's really strange. But you know what? This is a classic Al Capone moment, Al Capone being done for tax evasion when they all thought he'd done a lot more. Boris is being done, if he is found guilty, or if Sue Gray reports, as I suspect she will, that something's gone wrong in Downing Street, that possibly turning up with his wife and kid when there were 40 people in his garden might have given the clue he thought he was at the party. If he comes to that conclusion, as most of the British population has, then he's got himself into this mess because it looks like he wasn't straight. You know, George, the only reason I think he's still in his post is because Keir Starmer has done an absolutely abysmal job of holding him to account. Every Wednesday I watch PMQs expecting Keir Starmer to do the obvious thing, asking 5 tight questions and maybe a 6th one. But instead, he just blows it every time. There's no one even in the penalty area, and he's missing the goal. So he's got Cressida Dick, who's shilly-shallying maybe around this, or maybe she is doing a great job, we'll see. We've got Sue Gray, who's postponing, and we've got a leader of the opposition who just can't kick the ball into the gate.
He can't kick the ball into the net. He can't land a blow. And we were always told that he was boring but forensic. But if he's forensic, how come Boris Johnson is still standing?
Because he's not forensic. It's hard to believe that he's the leader of the opposition and they replaced somebody who, whether you liked him or not, Jeremy Corbyn, was absolutely clear in his narrative. You could dislike his narrative, but you'd understand it. Tony Blair may have made some catastrophic mistakes in terms of his own long-term legacy. But you know what? Boris would have already been toast by now. Boris would have had to resign because Tony Blair would have just done the sucker punch and that would have been the end of it. But Keir Starmer can't do it. I actually thought last week, oh, he's going to do it now because he's asking short, tight questions, Does the ministerial code apply to you? Yes, no questions like that. And he could have given Boris enough rope to hang himself, but no, then he just drifted off again. So
yeah, it was particularly poor last Wednesday. Running out of time, Lembit. So let me ask, it's not just that Keir Starmer is so patently incapable of leading the opposition, knocking out the government. It's that the government is bereft of challengers with any credibility. Isn't that also the case? Tories are holding back because they look at that front bench and they can't really see anyone that can win parliamentary seats for the Conservative Party in Bolsover, in County Durham, in Rotherham, etc., where Boris did win them.
Yeah, some truth in that. I actually think the stalking horses and the serious contenders are all keeping quiet because that's what they do in these leadership elections. Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, clearly regarded as favourites. Penny Mordaunt may be there, a runner as well. They don't want to stick their head above the parapet. But the point you make is the big problem here. Boris was only in this position because he was an election winner, and he proved that. There's a big problem for him in May because if on the first Thursday of May he's still in charge, it's quite possible they'll crash and burn in the local elections. Can somebody else do better? Probably. Privately, the word on the street with council candidates is they want him to go out of the way because he's an embarrassment. But who knows? Maybe he's the great Houdini. I doubt it. I would say the absolute longest he's going to be in post before he announces his departure is the first Friday of May. But I don't think he's going to get past the Sue Gray report. I think he'll basically have to say, I'm going to leave and there needs to be a leadership election. So they'll be quiet until the gates are open and the horse race begins. But as far as I'm concerned, unfortunately for Boris, who's a friend, but he's toast.
David Cameron, perhaps rather riskily, said that Boris Johnson escapes from trouble like a greased piglet. It was an unfortunate metaphor for Mr. Cameron because we later heard stories about him and piglets when they grow up. But he does have a Houdini-like quality to him, doesn't he?
That's true. If Boris Johnson makes it back or makes it through, it's the biggest comeback since Winston Churchill. Because I've never known anyone go this deep in and dig themselves out again. But maybe he will make electoral, or maybe he'll make political history. But he's still got the big problem. This is where we started, George. The Court of Public Opinion says, you didn't let me bury my mother as I wanted to, but you were having parties in your own backyard, literally. And all the other parties too. Now, it wasn't all of them. But you know what? There are more parties to come out, I believe. And how much more will the public stand? Eventually, I think David Davis has been the one true contender in terms of saying it like it is from the back bench when he said it's time to go. But we'll see what happens. I'll be the first to come on air and say I was completely wrong. Boris is going to go on and on. I just don't see it. Now's the time to put your money, but the odds are short.
Lembit Opik, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Should all artists boycott Spotify until they sack Joe Rogan? Yes, 17%. No, 83% on my Twitter feed. On YouTube, yes, 21%. No, 79%. And on my Telegram channel, yes, 15%. No, 85%. Thousands of you have voted. You've still got an hour to get your vote in on Twitter, YouTube, and Telegram. Coming up in the next hour, we've got big podcast news. You won't want to miss it. And we mark 50 years since the Bloody Sunday mass murder in Derry. Professor Deirdre Heenan. But first, I think we've got the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
The British Foreign Secretary has said it's very unlikely that British soldiers would be deployed in any conflict over Ukraine. Instead, Liz Truss said the UK was sending weapons to the country and strengthening its sanctions system, so oligarchs close to the Kremlin had nowhere to hide. She said the UK was also offering extra support to nearby NATO allies. She added that it was highly likely that the Russian president was looking to invade Ukraine. Russia has strongly denied any invasion plans. About 18,000 households in Scotland are still without power as a second storm is forecast to cause further disruption. Storm Corrie hit the northeast and the Scottish Highlands around 5 p.m. today, areas which were badly affected by Storm Malik on Saturday. A 60-year-old woman in Aberdeen and a 9-year-old boy in Staffordshire were killed by falling trees. Scotland's Deputy First Minister John Swinney said there had been widespread damage. However, he said the impact of the first storm was being felt most acutely in the northeast, an area which bore the brunt of power losses and damage during Storm Arwen in November. A number of welfare centres have been opened for people needing showers and power, while hot food is being served at various school canteens, and food trucks have also been sent to most areas in need. North Korea has conducted what it's thought to be its biggest missile launch since 2017. The weapon was apparently an intermediate-range missile which reached an altitude of 2,000 kilometres before coming down in the Sea of Japan. Japan, South Korea and the US have all condemned the launch, the 7th test this month. The UN prohibits North Korea from ballistic and nuclear weapons tests and has imposed strict sanctions. But the East Asian state regularly defies the ban, and leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to bolster his country's defences. The timing is also seen as significant, coming just before the Winter Olympics in China and ahead of the South Korean presidential election in March. Beijing has reported its highest number of COVID-19 cases in 18 months, 5 days ahead of the start of the Winter Olympics in the Chinese capital. After 20 more cases were reported in the capital, officials announced that some local areas had been locked down, with residents being tested. Separately, organisers of the Olympics reported 34 new infections within the event's closed-loop bubble. Officials said it included 13 athletes or officials arriving at the airport. Anyone testing positive is being put into isolation and only allowed to compete after getting 2 negative test results in 24 hours. The Winter Olympics are going ahead despite travel in and out of China being severely restricted since the pandemic began in December 2019 after the first cases were found in the Chinese city of Wuhan. Those travelling to Beijing for the Games must come on charter flights and stay in their bubble until they leave. Former US President Donald Trump has again hinted that he will run in the 2024 presidential candidacy and said he would consider pardoning those who were charged in connection with last January's deadly attack on the US Capitol if he wins the White House again. Trump's comments came during a campaign-style rally in Texas yesterday, in which he complained about the criminal prosecutions that Capitol rioters have faced as a result of their attempt to interrupt the counting of Electoral College votes after he lost the 2020 election. He said the rioters are being treated, quote, so unfairly. He continued to say, if I run and if I win, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. We will treat them fairly, Trump said. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons because they are being treated so unfairly. His comments reflect the growing sentiment among Republicans that the Capitol rioters should be forgiven and the events of that day forgotten, as the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack has issued scores of subpoenas to individuals and organisations as part of its probe and is expected to release an interim report on its findings this summer. Manchester United has said it does not condone violence of any kind after its player Mason Greenwood was accused of assaulting a woman. The allegations, which included video, photographs and a voice note alleging to be a conversation between Greenwood and the woman, were released on Instagram this morning. They've since been deleted. Manchester United said in a statement, quote, "We are aware of images and allegations circulating on social media. We will not make any further comment until the facts have been established. Manchester United does not condone violence of any kind." Police say they are working to establish the full circumstances after the woman accused Greenwood of assaulting her. Greater Manchester Police said it was aware of images and videos circulating on social media. Mason Greenwood has not responded to the allegations. Rafael Nadal has won a record 21st Grand Slam men's title in the most stunning fashion, fighting back from 2 sets down to beat Russia's Daniil Medvedev in a classic Australian Open final. Backed by a loud Melbourne crowd, 6th seed Nadal rallied to win the final 5th set on Rod Laver Arena. US Open champion Medvedev was going for his 2nd successive major title. The 25-year-old was in command before Nadal showed off all of his renowned grit and fight to earn an extraordinary win. No player has come from 2 sets down to win a Grand Slam final before. In the absence of the deported Novak Djokovic and the injured Roger Federer in Melbourne, Nadal has moved one ahead of his great rivals in the race to finish with the most major sets singles titles. And finally, record snowfalls have hit the United States, with the Northeast suffering the most severely. But the chill weather has severely struck balmy Florida, where locals are being warned to watch out for falling iguanas. Freeze warnings are in effect for around 10 million people in Florida, including Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa and Melbourne. According to the Weather Prediction Centre, quote, much of the state will remain mostly clear and frigid tonight, with a chance for scattered to isolated falling iguanas from trees due to sub-freezing temperatures that may temporarily paralyse them. Locals are not being advised to wear hard hats, and fortunately the raining reptiles usually rejuvenate when the warm weather returns. And let's hope it heats up for those iguanas stuck in those trees. That's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
A massive and moving vigil in Derry earlier today on the 50th anniversary of the mass murder of 14 people, innocent, unarmed civilian people who were attending a civil rights march. A mass murder carried out by a detachment of the Parachute Regiment, Para 1 of the British Army. It doesn't get much more serious than that, and even 50 years on, saying it doesn't dull it. Professor Deirdre Heenan is the Professor of Social Policy at Ulster University. No doubt saw, at least on television, the events in Derry today, and she joins me now. Professor Heenan, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What was the significance, do you think, of the crowds today? What was the mood? Tell us something about what it looked like.
Well, I was there today and yesterday. I live in Derry, and the mood was one of somber reflection. People thinking about those 14 people who went out on a civil rights march to demand justice and equality, better housing, better jobs, and those 14 people did not come home. So there was a real dignity today, a real sense of this will not be forgotten. And of course, Bloody Sunday has cast a very long shadow on the city of Derry. It's scarred, is still there. You can feel what happened on Bloody Sunday around every corner in the city. There are murals, there are memorials, but also alongside that somber reflection was also a deep recognition for the Bloody Sunday families and how they fought the state, how they spoke truth to power, how they refused to give up. And sometimes it's easy to forget that they were blamed, they were slurred, they were called all sorts of things. They were told that it was their fault, in the same way Grenfell Tower victims were told that it was their fault, Hillsborough victims were told that it was their fault, but they refused to give up. And at the heart of their campaign was also a quest for reconciliation. So they refused to be taken over by any political group, any paramilitary group. They just wanted truth and justice for their families. And I think they have become a beacon across the world for other people who are fighting injustice.
I remember very well the Widgery inquiry, the first inquiry, and it did indeed conclude that the soldiers were innocent and that the protesters were somehow guilty or had brought it on themselves. That has largely dissipated, though looking at social media today, not entirely dissipated. What about the demand for accountability? Now that Savile and David Cameron have entirely, without qualification, accepted the guilt of the armed forces on the day, the innocence of the dead on the day, what about the demand that people should face trial while they still can?
Well, as you rightly say, it's the issue about truth and justice. So it is important to remember that, yes, Bloody Sunday was 50 years ago, but actually it was only 12 years ago that David Cameron made that apology where he said what happened on Bloody Sunday was unjustified and unjustifiable. Indeed, he's been speaking this week saying that when he read the Savile report, he was deeply shocked by what he read, and he wanted to make sure that his apology left no room for doubt, no room for shade. So I think those people who refuse to accept it will never accept it. And that is really an issue for them, because if they cannot accept that the state went out and murdered 14 innocent civilians, then really that's an issue for them. And they need to examine their conscience. But as you rightly say, there is the issue then that so the Savile inquiry got to the truth. But what about justice? And I suppose that takes us then to the present day and the current British government's proposals around legacy. Those proposals would mean that no one would have access to justice, that all these inquiries and investigations would be closed down. And that is extraordinarily difficult for families across Northern Ireland to face. So uniquely, all political parties in Northern Ireland are against what is currently being proposed by the British government, because they feel that to have a glimmer of hope, people should feel that as a citizen of a state, they have the right to seek justice. It was agreed in the Stormont House Agreement that there would be an historical inquiries unit, that there would be an oral history and archive. And remember also that some families want truth. And that's what they wanted. They wanted to find out what happened to their loved ones. They wanted to know how they died. They wanted to know if they were alone. Other people are more interested in justice. So we can't treat the families as one group. And I mean all families, all victims of violence. But really these proposals are essentially the British government saying, now you must draw a line in the sand. You must forget about it. And I suppose in Northern Ireland, the feeling is really, could that possibly be said to people in Manchester? Could it possibly be said to people in Birmingham? Or is it really another sign that Northern Ireland is truly a place apart and we are told that there is no justice for people here?
Now, cards on the table, I have all my life supported United Ireland. I watched what happened 50 years ago. I was already a political activist. I believed that it would change everything forever and would, however long it took, begin to herald the reunification of the country. It's 50 years now. I don't suppose when I was 17 I thought it would be 50 years. Has it changed politics in Northern Ireland forever?
Well, I think it was a turning point in the Troubles. It was definitely one of the darkest days of the Troubles. And certainly historians would say that it meant that the violence was escalated. We don't know what would have happened had Bloody Sunday not have happened. Edward Heath certainly thought that we were staring into the abyss. So yes, it changed things. And speaking to people throughout the city, throughout Northern Ireland, they were very fearful, because how could they say to their children, you must respect law and order, you must respect the state, and try and explain this to them? So it was very, very difficult for people living here who did not want us to tip into civil war. And I think today is a reminder again about how fragile peace is in Northern Ireland, how volatile the situation in Northern Ireland still is, and how important it is that the British government are not reckless with our peace process. Peace here was very hard won, it's highly valued, and it is hugely important that the co-guarantors of the Belfast Agreement take their responsibilities very seriously. Of
course, there will be an early opportunity to test political opinion if the Stormont elections go ahead, will they?
Oh, they will go ahead. I think we're already on an election footing, so the parties are already beginning to set out their stall, as it were. The difficulty, I suppose, really in all of this is the difficulty for the DUP and the protocol. Since September, they've threatened to collapse our devolved institutions. They're now threatening to collapse them on a weekly basis. They have withdrawn from the North-South Ministerial Council, which is part of the Good Friday Agreement. And they're also now saying that they will not institute the checks at the ports. So they are ramping up the tension, trying to escalate tension, and having this threat hanging over Northern Ireland that our institutions are going to collapse. It is important to say that alongside that, we have by far the worst hospital waiting lists in the UK. Our health service is in crisis. Our education system is in crisis. So there's real anger that there's a threat to bring down our elected institutions and cause further instability at a time when we feel what we really need is some sense of certainty.
Has Jeffrey Donaldson made any difference at all? I knew him well. Always had some admiration for his political skills, at least. Has he turned anything round for the DUP?
Not at all. I think it's very clear again this week that the DUP is a deeply divided party. So this is a party that when we thought about it, we talked very much about how there was always a united front, that they never washed their dirty linen in public. The party is deeply divided, and Jeffrey has been unable to stamp his imprimatur on that party, even though he's been the leader for 6 months. So we have MPs doing their own things. We have different policy positions coming from within the party. As I say, this constant threat to collapse the devolved institutions. And really, the DUP have painted themselves into a corner over the Northern Ireland Protocol because they are consistently saying it must be scrapped, it must be binned, the protocol has to go, it's intolerable, it has really affected our constitutional position. But the reality is they have not put forward a single alternative. So were the government to trigger Article 16, which I really think they thought they would, what would be the alternative? I mean, Article 16 being triggered does not mean the protocol disappears. It means we go into further negotiations, further uncertainty. So it's this kind of constant threat, but with no solutions, no ability to say, well, what would we like instead? Or how can we ensure that we move forward with stability? Because this region desperately needs foreign direct investment. We, of course, are in the post-COVID period. There are serious issues around employment, and no employer is going to come here and say, well, I don't know if there's going to be a government in 6 months' time, because it is deeply unstable.
Do you share the view that Sinn Féin will be the biggest party?
It looks likely, and actually for Sinn Féin, they don't really have to do anything other than stand on the sidelines and watch the DUP implode, watch them making these threats. The reality is there is a joint committee. There were issues with the protocol. There were issues that needed to be addressed in terms of mitigations, and that is the job of the joint committee. And already we have seen some changes with the protocol. So I think for Sinn Féin, they simply think, well, we don't have to say anything. Why would we? We just need to sit back and let this happen.
Professor Heenan, thank you very much for joining us on this auspicious day of the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Should all artists boycott Spotify until they sack Joe Rogan? A, yes, 16%, falling. B, no, 84%. That's on my Twitter feed. On YouTube, it's 21% yes, 79% no. On Telegram, 16% yes, 84% no. I've got a question, I think. Yeah. Aha. If you get this right, I'm a Dutchman. In 2004, Mark Zuckerberg launched Facebook, except that wasn't its original name. What was that? A, the Facebook, B, FaceMash, C, MetaFace. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We asked you to help the podcast reach the magic number of 100 countries. I'm unusually proud of this, as you may be able to tell. And you answered the call. South Korea and Moldova took us over the hill, with the Moats podcast now downloaded in 101 countries. Little old us in 101 countries. So if you're not already listening to this genuinely worldwide sensation, then please subscribe so you can listen to Moats anywhere, anytime, from every corner of the earth. It's the distilled version of this show, shorn of all the peripheral material. Just pure Moats. 90 minutes instead of 3 hours. So if you do it and you love it, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're a Spotify user, please follow us and let us see when the next record broken will be.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The answer is B, face mash. Bet you didn't get that. He launched it at Harvard to rank the prettiness of girls. It then became the Facebook, and then a very bright man said, lose the. Now, let's take some calls. No, social media. Let's do some Chewy Barker. How come these polls always end up 80% to 20%? Maybe that's the split of the GG lovers and haters that tune into Moats. Joe Rogan is very cool, by the way, says Chewy. Not as cool as our George Galloway, but still very cool. I must look him up. Paul P says, I voted no, of course. But when I find out that the cheeky girls are also thinking of leaving, nothing moved in me. Now, I wish you'd written that before I interviewed Lembit Opik, for reasons which you may or may not grasp. Paul Smith, ex-Labour, says Rogan influences a lot of young people with his conspiracy theories about the COVID vaccine. There is no medical evidence for his assertions. I don't know if that means Paul thinks he should be cancelled, therefore. Paul Gerald says the irony of cancel culture is that it can make the cancelled person even more famous. I've not listened to anything of Joe Rogan's yet. I don't really know anything about him. Now I feel obliged to tune in. Quite right, Paul. The book they tried to ban always goes to the top of the bestseller list. Here's Paul in Salford on Partygate. Go ahead, Paul.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Good evening to you. Welcome. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's going to be the mother of all whitewashes, Partygate. Even a blind man could see that a couple of weeks ago, George.
Do you think that Sue Gray, 50 Shades of Grey, will pull out of the tackle, or will the police come to Boris's aid?
I think she'll pull out of the tackle, and I also believe that the police will pull back. They're not going to crucify either Boris Johnson or the rest of his cohorts. They're all in it together, George. Mm.
Well, I have an unpopular view in this studio even. I think Partygate is a damp squib. Although Lembit kept saying the public were up in arms about it, I have yet to meet a member of the public that is up in arms about it. I think it brings forth a shrug from most people. Most people expect that kind of behaviour from their rulers. They shouldn't, they oughtn't, but I think that they do. I also believe that Boris Johnson will survive Sue Gray and Cressida Dick. And I think if the polls continue to move in the direction now that they are moving, the Tories just 4 points behind after all of this, I don't think that the May Council elections will be a disaster for the Conservatives. That's my take. It's my honest take as an observer of politics for a long time, Paul. Last word to you.
Yes, I think there's about 2 weeks difference between your birthday and mine in August of 1954.
Oh, wow.
You've been round. Yeah.
We've both been round the block, yeah?
Yeah. And you've been in politics, and you've always fought the good fight in all your life. You're not naive, neither am I, and I believe that it's going to be the mother of all whitewashes, and it's going to. If you look at the Widgery report of 1972, the first one, regarding the 1st Battalion Parachute Regiment, I'm ashamed to say that I was in the 2nd Battalion as a young soldier, served 2 years in Northern Ireland in the height of the Troubles back in 74. I'm ashamed to say that my sister battalion, the 1st Battalion, the way they conducted themselves on that day, the greatest of shame, even though they had the yellow cards, instructions for opening fire, legitimate targets, and so on and so forth. But that's gone off the subject.
I'm really glad that you went on to that subject. I don't want to put you through any difficult questioning, but if you would answer this, I'd be grateful. What were they thinking? Opening fire. These things happened in India, in Africa, in all the colonies, but here they were in the United Kingdom with television cameras all around. What were they thinking when they began firing on the crowd?
Well, the thing is, in my opinion, British troops shouldn't have been sent to Northern Ireland in '69 anyway, to do a policeman's job, even though the IUC at the time couldn't do the job properly. But I think the worst thing in the world is when they sent the parachute regiment in there, because, yes, every soldier's a trained killer ultimately. But if you look at the John Stalker inquiry, they got rid of him just as he was getting to the crux of the matter. So, yes, I'm ashamed to say they acted unlawfully. I was in the 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment, and we didn't hear that much about it, actually. I'm not saying it was hushed up, but we didn't hear that much. But the fact of the matter is, what drove them to commit such acts of violence against innocent people? Only God Almighty knows that. But the train killers have been sent in there, and I'm not saying they were on drugs or anything like that. But God Almighty, I really can't answer that question. Only the guilty parties could.
Great call, Paul. I'm really glad you made it, Paul in Salford. Let's go to Dan in Portsmouth on Joe Rogan. Go ahead, Dan.
Great show, George. Absolutely love the show.
Thank you.
So, with Joe Rogan, I think the key thing for me is it's a long format show, and he's done over 1,700 shows at this point. And I think if you get people to speak for that length of time, anywhere between 2 to 4 hours in a podcast, you're going to be able to pick holes in it. And this guy clearly isn't right wing. He's had many left wing people, from Marshall.
He supported Bernie Sanders. I know that. Doesn't sound all that right wing.
Well, exactly. He's had Edward Snowden on there as an example. Sam Harris. And I think
it's about time he had me on his show. Mr. Rogan, if you're watching, I'm supporting you. Give us a call. Get your people to call my people. Sorry, Dan, go on.
Absolutely, George. I was going to agree with you. There's so many UK people that have been over there, and you are the one on the list. How has that not happened? But I think it
maybe
is the
the
key.
money's not right.
Yeah, maybe that's so. Maybe that's so. But yeah, we should get you over there. But it's that long format, and I think I mean, you do
of course,
this
it's very
show,
difficult not to. It's very difficult not to offend anybody. But the fundamental question, Dan, is why do we need to cancel people even if we find them offensive? Because somebody else will find us offensive and will call for us to be cancelled. Can't they see that you live by the sword, you're dying by the sword?
Precisely. If Joe gets cancelled, who's next? And it could be the exact people that are calling for him to be cancelled.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to me so screamingly obvious. I'm amazed that the number of so-called liberals, or maybe I'm not amazed, but they really have been gunning for him. The Joni Mitchell, I hear younger viewers and listeners. She was really great. She was really great back in the day. Neil Young, I'm not sure we'll miss his oeuvre quite so much. But where's it all going to end, Dan?
Well, I don't think it is going to end for a while. I mean, all we can see is we can see it in the metrics. And the metrics say that over 10 million people enjoy listening to Joe Rogan. And I don't think Neil Young was getting 10 million listens on Spotify each month, was he?
I'm absolutely certain about that. Thanks, Dan. You've been great fun. I really appreciate it. But I've got a read that I have to do. It's a very big announcement on podcast. Coming soon to Spotify, Apple Podcast, and wherever you listen to the Moats podcast. Now, you'll know already, if you're a regular viewer, that I'm very proud to have played a part in the downfall of Robert Maxwell, the fraud that he was. It's been 30 years, can you believe it, since Robert Maxwell fell or jumped or was pushed off the back of his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine Maxwell. Whatever happened to her? It's still widely disputed what happened to Robert Maxwell. So for the first time ever, I got together with my old friend, the editor of this show, Ron Mackay, to discuss the fate of Robert Maxwell. You may recall I told you a couple of weeks ago that Robert Maxwell actually stole Ron's pension, along with the pension of thousands of others. And crucially, we discussed the evidence which surrounds his strange death. Take a look at this.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland, even the European, which he then owned, all over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret. I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing it or gaining it means nothing to me.
I'm with Ghislaine. You never thought you'd hear me saying that. And I'm with Ghislaine only on one thing. I believe that her father was murdered, and I discuss it with Ron Mackay over it. It's a three-parter. It is, if I say so myself, really fascinating. I had actually not quite in my own mind put together the unbroken line of venality from Robert Maxwell to Ghislaine Maxwell and where she has now ended up. I hadn't really put together in my mind for quite some time quite the role that I played in the downfall of Robert Maxwell. You'll be startled, I think, to discover just how much of that there was. Now, look, this podcast will be released at 10 p.m. on Sunday, the 13th of February. Okay? 10 p.m. on Sunday, the 13th of February. So put that in your diary. If you're hard up, then wait till the 10th of February. But if you want exclusive access to the whole series in video form, you can do it right now. I mean right now. It's less than £4 to be a patron of mine on Patreon, and you'll be able to see every episode 3 weeks before the podcast is released. So here's how you do it. You click over to my Patreon, Patreon, sign up and support my channel right now. Search patreon.com/George Galloway. But this is just the start. I think I alluded to it last week. We've got so many plans for my Patreon page. I'm really genuinely excited about it. For example, we're going to put my audio book, Street Fighting Years, breaking it up into chapters, and with a bit of top and tail from me, bit of interaction from me. So you'll be able to not just listen to my book about the 1970s, but hear me discussing the music, the films, the culture, the politics of the 1970s. You'll be able to do that. But perhaps most importantly, I discovered a treasure trove, really hundreds of hours of video of all the speeches I made in the run-up to the Iraq War. And at that stage, I was speaking once a day, sometimes twice a day, all over Britain. Some of you might even have been at those meetings. It's really weird looking back at them, what I looked like 20 years ago, what you looked like in the audience 20 years ago. You might very well want to see yourself at those meetings. So each week we'll release on the date, corresponding date of 2002, 2003. We'll release the meeting that I did in Croydon, in Manchester, at Oxford University, and so on. It's really a fascinating trip down memory lane, at least for me, and I think it will be also for you. But Mr. Podcast himself is Simon, who joins me now. Simon, thanks. What news of podcast work in general?
Well, George, you've already alluded to so much of what we've got going on. There is never.
Sorry, did I steal your thunder?
There's never been a better time to be a viewer of Moats. The Patreon, at George Galloway, it's going to be so easy to get access to what is essentially going to be your memoir. Everything that you've worked towards, everything you've built around will soon be accessible for our supporters of you and of the Moats programme. And it's so simple. I can show you, actually. I've been doing it while we've been sat here. If you go to your App Store or Google Play, depending on what device you have, and search Patreon, it's as simple as downloading it like that. You click open, you search George Galloway, and your page will be available for you to support. And like you've said, we've got a plethora of things that are coming on there. But speaking
even music, even I've got a music license, so I can play music. So I'm going to do my own Desert Island discs on it.
Oh, it'd be absolutely fantastic. And with your memoirs of speeches as well, there's an opportunity for us to go through the music of the 70s. We can talk about what you were listening to at the time, what it was influencing at the time. It is really going to be a really exciting time for you and for the supporters on Patreon. But in the podcast world, again, I wouldn't come on here if we didn't have successes, but every week we have a success. So let's get straight into it. Our listenership last week jumped by 24%,
wow,
which is absolutely incredible. In the last month, our listenership has doubled, which is absolutely phenomenal to watch. It's been so exciting to watch this graph just rise and rise. We've got new listeners in Trinidad and Tobago, the Bahamas, Kyrgyzstan. So that's what 121 countries we're now listening to. I was reminded the other day,
121?
121.
How many countries are there in the world?
I believe there's only about 190. I mean, don't quote me on that, but we've really not got that far to go. And a lot of people have been asking as well, not only about the fact of do I own an iron for my shirt? Yes, I do. But people in America were going, where's Missouri? Where's Mississippi? Where's Vermont? I can tell you, every single state in the United States, somebody is subscribed to the mother of all talk shows.
Very good. That is really interesting. And Kyrgyzstan, that is... Are we still number one in Zimbabwe?
We are still number one in Zimbabwe. We're currently in the top 20 in Pakistan. We were in the top 5 in Thailand this week. Russia, we're in the top 40. In the UK, we're beating out some really, really big names. So for you guys, wherever you are, subscribed, listening, supporting, thank you so much. We can't do it without you.
Thank you, Simon. I'll just need to learn what a podcast is. But I will, I promise. I promise to do that. I've never listened to a podcast.
Except ours, of course.
Goes right over my head, all of that. But it all sounds like very good news. Now, Niall Fraser-Love says the way free speech works is that the government can't ban you from speaking, but forums are free to set their own rules. In a free society, you're free to blaspheme, just as a priest is equally free to excommunicate you for saying blasphemy in his church. And Diamond Dean says, Spotify now, other platforms soon. People will be boycotting each other to the point where there's a chasm too wide to cross. And Eldell says, true artists, if that's what they actually are, would let their art speak or sing for themselves, not demand the cancelling of others. Karen says, absolutely ridiculous that anyone wants to silence alternative opinions from the mainstream media bias. I bet Joni Mitchell and Neil Young aren't selling many of their oldies on it. Paul Hammond says, war is a failure of diplomacy. NATO can't do diplomacy. And Reevesy says, China and Russia and other nations stop dealing in oil in dollars. The US cannot now just print money and their economy is tanking. They need a war to save their economy. It's all about the money. A break, I think. Have I got another question? Yeah, I do. Well, Zuckerberg, I gave the answer to that. In 1936, Charlie Chaplin's silent film Modern Times was released. Who was the director? A. Konrad Zybelski, B. King Vidor, C. Chaplin. Answer after this.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
From the makers of Track and Trace comes the Boris Johnson SatNav.
Right, next right. No, left. I mean left.
What?
Yes, no, this left. Oh, crikey, you've missed it, bugger.
Oh, bloody Tories.
Or have you? Turn round. Or, in fact, don't turn around. Carry on, yes. You have arrived at your destination.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
the mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
The answer is Charlie Chaplin. He wrote, directed, and starred. Clever man was Mr. Chaplin. You've got 5 minutes left to vote. Should all artists boycott Spotify until they sack Joe Rogan? A, yes, 16%. B, no, 84%. 2,500 people have voted. You can be a voter too. On my Twitter account, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram channel. But calls right up to the news, I think. Eve is in Idaho. Always welcome, Eve. What would you like to say?
Thank you, George, for letting me on your show.
Welcome.
I wanted to say something about the extraterritoriality of nuclear weapons. In 1950, General de Gaulle told more exactly, the American asked General de Gaulle to put nuclear weapon in France. And he said, no, if nuclear weapons are in France, they will be under French command. They cannot be under NATO command. And I think that what happened with the extension of NATO is that Putin is telling the US, you cannot have weapons 100 miles from our home where the command is actually in a faraway country 8,000 miles away. I think this is a fundamental problem. It's that you cannot have extraterritoriality for nuclear weapons. It's a kind of proliferation of nuclear weapons, if you think of it.
Yeah.
Yes, and,
absolutely is. And also the capacity for accident multiplies exponentially the farther away from you, whose weapons they are, have planted those weapons, and the number of fingers that could be on the button.
Yes, and you break also the symmetry of the first strike. You see, if you like the acronyms, for Putin, NATO is a nuclear advanced targeting organization against Russia for the US, and I would say at the expense of the Europeans.
Yeah, of course, we'd be the first people to pay the price. If war breaks out in Europe, by definition, it's us in Europe that are going to pay the price.
Yes. In fact, I cannot understand why countries like Poland or Lithuania and all those countries accept to be in that position.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Eve, thanks for the call. David's in New York, staying in the US. On Joe Rogan. Go ahead, David.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. My first time calling into this program. I really enjoyed this program.
Thank you. Welcome.
About Joe Rogan, like you, I'd never heard of Joe Rogan until I became aware of the attempts to force Spotify to remove his podcast. So it appears that those trying to cancel him were referring to his. He does many interviews, a lot with comedians and music people. And those weren't the ones that caused the people trying to cancel him to get upset. They had issue with his interviews with two medical researchers who were espousing contrary views with regard to COVID-19. So, of course, I tried to find these podcasts, and Google is useless. Google only shows things anti-Joe Rogan, right? And it's search. So I subscribe to Spotify. Spotify's okay. If you have Spotify, it was still a little difficult to find, but I was able to find it, and I would let you know. So to simplify your search, what I found was the interviews, the two interviews in December, one with Dr. McCullough and another with Dr. Malone, both rather prestigious researchers and virologists. And with contrary views with regard to certain aspects of the official narrative on COVID-19. And so this is what I finally, just to share with people trying to find these things.
Yeah.
In Spotify, exactly very simple. Just do pound because it's a 3-hour show. It's a 3-hour interview. By the way, when he does his interviews with artists and musicians and comedians, he sometimes gets high and stuff like that. And jokes around and fools around. But these interviews with these doctors, he was right on point. He's a great interview, as you are, and he very what's the word, objective in terms of his questions and intelligent. So anyway, the search you want is in Spotify. If you have Spotify, if you subscribe to Spotify, #1757 will get you the interview with Dr. Malone, a 3-hour interview, and just that simple search because that's the show number, you see.
Yeah.
So, and #1747 will get you the interview with Dr. McCullough. And
I'm sure people are doing that. I mean, I don't share those contrary views, or at least I'm inferring what I think those contrary views are.
You might change your mind if you listen to those podcasts.
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
possible.
if facts change, so do my opinions. And if other people have got opinions that make me question the facts that I thought were the facts, that's a good thing, isn't it? Not a bad thing.
Yes. Well, one more thing regarding that. When 9/11 happened, okay, I'm in New York, so I was as angry as everyone in America, and even more especially because I'm in New York, and I believed the narrative until for months. The same narrative was being repeated again and again and again in almost exactly the same way by every single major media outlet, and my antennae started to go up. This sounds like propaganda. I wasn't sure what the real story was, but propaganda. Same with the Iraq War, and this feels that way too. I mean, it may be right that the official narrative is correct, but it feels like propaganda because it's blasted at you in exactly the same way from every single outlet.
Well, I'm really grateful, David. Thanks for that. I think a lot of people will be taking you up on your search directions. Thanks for that. Gerasimos is in Ottawa. Ha! Gerasimos, welcome to the show. It's a wonder you can cross the road with all these trucks there.
You can't cross the roads. You're absolutely stuck. Everything is jammed up tight. But this is just an expression of how the country feels about this entire COVID thing. Although we've done fairly well in Canada, nonetheless, the government's messaging has been less than perfect, more like in Bojo's tennis court than anywhere else. I mean, I think you could add Biden and Bojo in to young Trudeau.
Has Trudeau's political position begun to slip? I mean, he called an election. No. It didn't go all that well, though he survived. Yeah, has he fallen further?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think he's in a stable position for a couple of years anyway. He doesn't need to call another election, and no one's going to throw him out at this point.
Don't you think it's a bit of a rum look, fleeing the capital from your own people? Although CBC said they were Russian.
Yeah.
They said the Russians were behind it all.
They did, eh? Good for the CBC. I used to produce for the CBC, so that was 50 years ago, so I'm not surprised.
It just shows you how Russiagate has got everywhere.
Well, they're just so smart, those Russians. I mean, of course, like, we have to be very careful because they could be everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a young man, my father used to read. My father was a survivor of the San Pedro de las Gardenias concentration camp in Spain. He fought with the international brigades.
Okay.
And in the Spanish Civil War. And I used to see him reading the newspaper, and he would have a pencil. And he would underline things. And I said, "Dad, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm reading between the lines because the only way you can find the truth is to read between the lines."
Very good. God rest his soul. Gerasimos, let me ask you one more question. I think as George Bush would put it, they misunderestimated the truckers. They didn't think there'd be as many of them, and they didn't think the public would line the routes to wave their flags and wave to them. Hortons, is it? The coffee chain refused to serve them. and so on. Do you think they've had a bit of a wake-up call now when they've seen the sheer numbers that this protest has garnered?
I think that they found that the weight of their knee on the Canadian neck is too much, and they're going to have to do a retreat and
yeah,
rethink
it looks
their
like that
position.
to me. Yeah,
I don't see any way out of it. The people are very angry, and part of it is that they're angry because of all of the misinformation. Another part of it is they're angry because people are just not strong anymore. You know, people are not natively strong. They don't have the capacity, let's say, that someone in Britain had 100 years ago, or some settler in Canada had 150 years ago.
Very interesting. We'll need to explore that another time. Thanks. Give my love to Ottawa. Cornelius is in Swansea on the Ukraine. Go ahead, Cornelius.
Evening, George.
Evening, sir.
I listened to the American reporter you had on earlier on, who's based in Russia.
Yes.
And he was saying that Britain's getting heavily involved with America.
Yeah.
In relation to this conflict with the Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
I listened to an interview with Vital Klitschko, the ex-heavyweight boxer, that was actually praising Britain for the help that they were giving the Ukraine in relation to military backup, not physical backup, but equipment backup.
Yeah.
And he also said sarcastically regarding Germany about donating like 1,000 helmets.
Yeah.
And so it's like as if there's a little bit of conflict in reporting, as what like Vital Klitschko was saying, and compared to the report that you had on the program earlier.
No, I mean, of course, there's divided opinion in Ukraine, and you could easily persuade me that the majority of people in Ukraine hate Russia, hate Putin. I get that. But there's a very substantial minority of people, even in Western Ukraine, that can see what's going on as extremely dangerous to them and to their country. And there's 100% of Eastern Ukraine who stand with Russia. So it's a very divided country, and Western leaders are using Ukraine as a proxy, aren't they? They're using Ukraine as a stick to poke Russia with, don't you see?
Yeah. Obviously, George, you know far more than myself. But I was just listening to the program this evening, and I listened to that reporter.
Klitschko's got well-known, very right-wing political views, very Ukrainian nationalist, very anti-Russian. So I'm not surprised.
Okay, mate. Okay, thanks for putting that right in my mind.
No, not at all. Thank you very much indeed, Cornelius, for calling. That poll is now closed. It was comprehensive. Mr. Rogan, you'll be pleased to know. 84% say that you should not be sacked from Spotify. That's on Twitter. On YouTube, 78% say no. And on Telegram, 84% say no. And it was a big poll as well, which just goes to show that this has had, like so many things in life, so many things in politics, the law of unintended consequences has kicked in. Now, look, in the next hour, we've got the coolest of correspondents, Garland Nixon in Washington, D.C., and pretty cool also, Steve Norris in London on Boris and Partygate. Oh, and there's been a phenomenal response to Maxwell the Monster. Apparently, I'll give you an update on that. But first, it's the news for the last time this evening with the one and only, I see he's wearing glasses now. Is that new? Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
The British Foreign Secretary has said it's very unlikely that British soldiers would be deployed in any conflict over Ukraine. Instead, Liz Truss said the UK was sending weapons to the country and strengthening its sanctions system, so oligarchs close to the Kremlin had nowhere to hide. She said the UK was also offering extra support to nearby NATO allies. She added that it was highly likely that the Russian president was looking to invade Ukraine. Russia has strongly denied any invasion plans. About 18,000 households in Scotland are still without power as a second storm is forecast to cause further disruption. Storm Corrie hit the northeast and the Scottish Highlands around 5 p.m. today, areas which were badly affected by Storm Malik on Saturday. A 60-year-old woman in Aberdeen and a 9-year-old boy in Staffordshire were killed by falling trees. Scotland's Deputy First Minister John Swinney said there had been widespread damage. However, he said the impact of the first storm was being felt most acutely in the northeast, an area which bore the brunt of power losses and damage during Storm Arwen in November. A number of welfare centres have been opened for people needing showers and power, while hot food is being served at various school canteens, and food trucks have also been sent to most areas in need. North Korea has conducted what it's thought to be its biggest missile launch since 2017. The weapon was apparently an intermediate-range missile which reached an altitude of 2,000 kilometres before coming down in the Sea of Japan. Japan, South Korea and the US have all condemned the launch, the 7th test this month. The UN prohibits North Korea from ballistic and nuclear weapons tests and has imposed strict sanctions. But the East Asian state regularly defies the ban, and leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to bolster his country's defences. The timing is also seen as significant, coming just before the Winter Olympics in China and ahead of the South Korean presidential election in March. Beijing has reported its highest number of COVID-19 cases in 18 months, 5 days ahead of the start of the Winter Olympics in the Chinese capital. After 20 more cases were reported in the capital, officials announced that some local areas had been locked down, with residents being tested. Separately, organisers of the Olympics reported 34 new infections within the event's closed-loop bubble. Officials said it included 13 athletes or officials arriving at the airport. Anyone testing positive is being put into isolation and only allowed to compete after getting 2 negative test results in 24 hours. The Winter Olympics are going ahead despite travel in and out of China being severely restricted since the pandemic began in December 2019 after the first cases were found in the Chinese city of Wuhan. Those travelling to Beijing for the Games must come on charter flights and stay in their bubble until they leave. Former US President Donald Trump has again hinted that he will run in the 2024 presidential candidacy and said he would consider pardoning those who were charged in connection with last January's deadly attack on the US Capitol if he wins the White House again. Trump's comments came during a campaign-style rally in Texas yesterday, in which he complained about the criminal prosecutions that Capitol rioters have faced as a result of their attempt to interrupt the counting of Electoral College votes after he lost the 2020 election. He said the rioters are being treated, quote, so unfairly. He continued to say, if I run and if I win, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. We will treat them fairly, Trump said. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons because they are being treated so unfairly. His comments reflect the growing sentiment among Republicans that the Capitol rioters should be forgiven and the events of that day forgotten, as the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack has issued scores of subpoenas to individuals and organisations as part of its probe and is expected to release an interim report on its findings this summer. Manchester United has said it does not condone violence of any kind after its player Mason Greenwood was accused of assaulting a woman. The allegations, which included video, photographs and a voice note alleging to be a conversation between Greenwood and the woman, were released on Instagram this morning. They've since been deleted. Manchester United said in a statement, quote, "We are aware of images and allegations circulating on social media. We will not make any further comment until the facts have been established. Manchester United does not condone violence of any kind." Police say they are working to establish the full circumstances after the woman accused Greenwood of assaulting her. Greater Manchester Police said it was aware of images and videos circulating on social media. Mason Greenwood has not responded to the allegations. Rafael Nadal has won a record 21st Grand Slam men's title in the most stunning fashion, fighting back from 2 sets down to beat Russia's Daniil Medvedev in a classic Australian Open final. Backed by a loud Melbourne crowd, 6th seed Nadal rallied to win the final 5th set on Rod Laver Arena. US Open champion Medvedev was going for his 2nd successive major title. The 25-year-old was in command before Nadal showed off all of his renowned grit and fight to earn an extraordinary win. No player has come from 2 sets down to win a Grand Slam final before. In the absence of the deported Novak Djokovic and the injured Roger Federer in Melbourne, Nadal has moved one ahead of his great rivals in the race to finish with the most major sets singles titles. And finally, record snowfalls have hit the United States, with the Northeast suffering the most severely. But the chill weather has severely struck balmy Florida, where locals are being warned to watch out for falling iguanas. Freeze warnings are in effect for around 10 million people in Florida, including Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa and Melbourne. According to the Weather Prediction Centre, quote, much of the state will remain mostly clear and frigid tonight, with a chance for scattered to isolated falling iguanas from trees due to sub-freezing temperatures that may temporarily paralyse them. Locals are not being advised to wear hard hats, and fortunately the reigning reptiles usually rejuvenate when the warm weather returns. And let's hope it heats up for those iguanas stuck in those trees. That's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
It's the final hour. Get your communication in quick. New poll: is Boris Johnson using Ukraine as a deliberate distraction from Partygate? A, yes. B, no. Duh. I don't write these polls, by the way. I'm not responsible. That seems to me screamingly obvious, but we'll see what the public think. You can vote on my Twitter account, on my YouTube, and on my Telegram. Uzi says, ha! George is fed up with people accusing him of being sponsored by Yorkshire Tea. That's right, I never was sponsored by Yorkshire Tea, and it was never Yorkshire Tea in my cup. It was Red Bush. But my good friend Adil, who is a Yorkshireman, gave me this, Galloway's Moats, a right good brew. Very nice cup, very nice Red Bush, as always. Now look, let's go to Washington, D.C. There's much to talk about with my good friend Garland Nixon. Garland, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. I don't really know where to start. Let me start with Donald Trump. He gave his clearest hint yet, didn't he, that he's running in 2024. Here's my question. If he runs, he wins. And how can those that expended all that effort to get him out last time allow him to run and win again? I'm not sure that he'll manage to actually even get to the starting line. What say you?
Yes, it's fairly apparent now based on the disastrous first year of the Biden administration that Donald Trump, Donald Duck, Donald anybody will be able to beat Joe Biden in 2024. The Republicans are undoubtedly going to retake the House and Senate. I suspect there will be numerous investigations into Hunter Biden and various other things. And I don't think it'll be a fun 2 years for Joe Biden. By the end, if he's still able to run, he'll be beaten, battered, and bruised. And if Donald Trump's in good health, I think he's going to win. Now, what Donald Trump did at a rally he was having in Texas was he basically said that the 600 or 700 people who have been charged by the Justice Department in connection with January 6th were treated, to quote him, disgracefully, and that he would consider pardoning them. And it's what Donald Trump does. He holds his base together. he gets his entire base excited, he gets them to the polls, and that's his strength, and that's what I think could carry him through. Again, providing that he's in good health and spirit in 2024, I think that's what could carry him through.
Speaking of carrying through, who's carrying Joe Biden? I asked the question at the beginning of the show. It seems to me impossible to believe that Joe Biden is really in executive control of the most powerful country on the earth. And it doesn't seem likely to me that there's enough confidence in his vice president to let her control the country either. So I ask the question, who is running the United States?
Well, and that's a good question, because to start, before you get to running the country, neither one of them can even do a press conference. Neither one of them can put together a coherent set of or articulate any coherent policies. So they try to get through, both of them try to get through press conferences without humiliating themselves. So it is commonly believed inside the Beltway that there are the reason for the inconsistent foreign policies, inconsistent domestic policies, is because there are a number of forces fighting for power behind, a hollow and decrepit administration.
Are they wagging the dog, therefore, in the Ukrainian imbroglio, or are they serious about? Are they cavalier about the prospect of a European war?
It's interesting you say that, because there's certainly an argument to be made that this is wag the dog. But if you look at the history of the Victoria Nulands and the people in the Biden administration, this was predictable. It was almost like 2000 when George Bush came in with the crew that he came in, and many of us who knew who they were predicted, well, we're going to have some significant foreign policy problems. So it may effectively, distract people. But to be quite honest, it's falling apart. One of the things that's being heavily reported in the United States is the row between the President Zelensky and other members of the Ukrainian leadership and the neocons in Washington, D.C. So I think the Ukrainian leadership has figured out that they were being fattened up for the slaughter all along when they thought they had a strong political and military ally.
That's right. It turns out that if Zelensky is regime changed, he'll be regime changed from Washington rather than Moscow.
Yes, and you're looking at something similar to what the Washington did in South Vietnam and whatever it was, 62 or 63, where they coup the leader, they put in a more compliant government, but they end up with so much instability that the country, eventually falls apart. And right now, it appears there's great instability. However, I will add this: one of the things that the last few weeks, maybe few months, has demonstrated, I'm sure, to Ukraine and to, at minimum, the leaders of France and Germany, is that Russia is actually a more reliable diplomatic and economic partner to them than the U.S. empire. Russia wants a diplomatic resolution. Ukraine now wants a diplomatic resolution. And the polls say the people of Ukraine and the people of the U.S. want diplomatic resolutions. And the U.S., seems almost, irresponsible and giddy over the prospect of what could be a war that could end humanity.
Yeah, the Ukraine is only one of the tracks. China was the other one. China's being left alone. I suppose it's slightly relieved. It looked like it was going to be war with China. Then it looked as if it was going to be war with Russia. But truthfully, I believe the United States is not capable of fighting a war with hypersonically nuclear-armed adversaries. And I agree with you. I don't believe the American people would stand for it. The polls are clear enough. Biden should negotiate a settlement with Russia.
Oh, absolutely. The American people, if you look, the last poll I saw was somewhere around 59 to 29 in favor of, as the poll put, a deal with Putin for a resolution. If you look at the numbers in America, the number of the polls in America, the voters, number one is healthcare, and then you get to climate and other things like that and infrastructure. So the American people overwhelmingly want the leaders of our country to focus on the stress and strife that people are going through as a result of the pandemic economy.
Now, you're a retired police officer. You're a member of the ACLU, the Civil Liberties Union. You keep an eye on matters judicial. A liberal, so-called, I hate the word, a liberal justice has been prevailed upon by the Democrats to announce his stepping down so that they can, while they still can, control who gets his seat. Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, there's, Justice Stephen Breyer has announced his retirement, and there are many who believe that he's doing this prior to the Republicans regaining power in November. It's almost, unless there's some kind of a black swan event, it's almost baked in the cake at this point. And he's giving President Biden an opportunity to appoint someone. Now, the discussion has been, will it be a black female? Apparently, apparently President Biden has said it's going to be a black female. But then the secondary discussion is, well, if the black female is Clarice Thomas, the daughter of Clarence Thomas, is that going to be good enough? The discussion now is definitely moving to the ideology. Do we just get another person who, is who checks off the boxes, but they're just another corporate puppet, which is probably the safest bet with President Biden.
Are you telling me that Clarence Thomas, I remember so vividly the controversy about him getting on the Supreme Court, his daughter might be joining him there?
Well, I don't know that he has a daughter named Clarice Thomas. That was kind of a metaphor, but that was if you get my point, it was just any random far right wing conservative.
I do. It's about tick boxing. It's about identity politics. That's how Kamala Harris got there, and she's turned out to be a disaster. How certain are you that the Republicans are going to win in November?
The polls are overwhelming, but the other part of it is this. This is why I'm certain. I do a lot of radio around the country, and what I find is the various interest groups, that the coalition that makes up the Democratic Party is extremely upset, dismayed. I interview people who do work for immigrants and work on the border on behalf of immigrants. And I find especially the younger Latino community are furious with President Biden. We had an election here recently in the D.C. area where it was suspected that the 100,000 Ethiopians who lived in the area might have turned or helped to turn the election for the Republicans in Virginia. So the coalition that got Joe Biden over the hump is collapsing, and I suspect that there will be a bloodbath.
Fascinating. Garland, thanks very much indeed, as always, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. I need to get through some more of this social media. Derwood says, do you think the current impasse between Russia and the US will eventually result in a pragmatic resolution of the situation? Yes. Dante says Neil Young is an amazing musician, but his political thought crystallized in the 1960s, fossilized, in fact. Roger Waters is also an amazing musician, but has grown out of blinding doctrines and evolved. And DDDV says only those on the wrong side demand censorship. If truth is on your side, you have nothing to fear. Joe Rogan is a hero. Well, Farron in Washington, D.C. thinks that Joe Rogan is a hero or doesn't. I don't know. Let's hear from Farron, though. Go ahead, Farron.
Hey, George. Great to see you again. I miss talking to you on In Question, but I figured I'd talk here.
Well,
I've been a long
it
time.
is always a delight to hear your voice. It would be even better if I could see your face, but go ahead, Farron.
One of these days, I'll come on with
Come on with your video, yeah, please.
Yeah. So I've been a long-time Joe Rogan listener since even back when he first started in 2012. I kind of have lost track of listening to him ever since I started taking over as the host of the evening news program. Because, you know, when you have a show, you get less time to do what you want to do, as you know. But one of the things why I think he's just getting all of this is because if you've never watched his show, he will let anyone come on and talk about anything. He's had people from Alex Jones, who's been, you know, the master of all conspiracies, to Bob Lazar, who talks about how he had an alien encounter. He talks to doctors that are for COVID, against COVID. So that's where I think a lot of the problem herein lies. You're now having more and more artists like Paul McCartney. You're having David Grohl, Pearl Jam, all kind of joining this bandwagon. And when you think about it, it's like, okay, well, let's look at where they are in the charts of their music. And, you know, the Beatles will always be high, but a lot of these other guys, it's like, maybe they're jumping in on this to, you know, maybe get a little bit more listens.
To remind people they're still alive, Farron.
Exactly. But I did want to ask you this question because you've been talking about the show about Russia and Ukraine as well.
Yeah.
I've been talking about on my show all week. Tucker Carlson on Fox News, for those that don't know, he's the #1 rated cable show across the board on Fox News and across the mainstream media in the United States. He asked last Thursday, why does the United States care about Ukraine? Why does the United States care about what's happening with Russia and Ukraine? It's a country in Europe. We have no ties to it. And even said to the lament of President Putin saying, you know, we're getting involved in their problems. Russia kind of has a reason to be mad at us right now. Ever since that, George, now you have all the Sunday shows, including this morning with reliable sources and Brian Stelter saying he is now a Putin puppet.
Yeah, he's a Russian agent. He's a Russian agent, like you, like me, like Donald Trump. We're all Russian agents. In fact, that trucking protest up in Ottawa, Putin organized that. He's behind it. He's driving one of the trucks. America's gone mad with this Russia obsession, Farron.
And that's my question. Why is it that you even have this small inkling of, hey, let's look at it from the other side.
Yeah.
Let's put the shoe on the other foot.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're a Russian asset.
Yeah. It is extraordinary. Tucker Carlson is to the right of Genghis Khan, but he insists on this subject, on dealing with the facts. Is Russia going to invade Ukraine? If it does, what does it have to do with us? Why are we going to spend American blood and treasure on the Ukraine? Now, you and I both know that Russia isn't going to invade Ukraine. I can say categorically it is not going to invade Ukraine. So why is the world being turned upside down on this fantasy, kind of computer game, all these experts in the studios doing their military, showing their graphics? It's all balderdash. And that's all that Carlson said. And now he's joined me as a Russian agent.
And I'm right there with you guys. And
It's
you know,
amazing.
it's interesting. A lot of Americans are starting to learn a little bit about the neo-Nazis that are in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And another question that he had asked on social media, Tucker, was like, hey, if we're so big on this whole January 6th and you know, taking over the Capitol and destroying democracy, and all of these folks were white supremacists and they're being condemned here in the United States, then why are you funding the same kinds of people in the Ukraine?
Well, that is the $64,000 question. And moreover, if you want to see what a coup looks like, take a look at the Ukrainian parliament on fire. Take a look at the president having to run for his life just ahead of the mob. Take a look at the Maidan in 2014, organized by the United States and the European Union. You want to tell me January 6th was a coup? You've never seen a coup like the one that took place in Kiev in 2014. Farron, fabulous to hear your voice. Look forward to seeing you again in the week, perhaps. Mike is in South Carolina on the same subject. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George, great to talk to you again.
And you, my friend.
I wanted to talk to you about Ukraine, particularly because it's the most important topic of the day. But if we have time at the end, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Joe Rogan as well.
Yeah, please.
Since you haven't listened to him, but the Ukraine thing. Okay, a lot is being made about this, and I don't know what it looks like in the UK, but here in the U.S., the media from all the national and cable to the local is saturated with positive war propaganda, basically, like it was during Iraq and Afghanistan.
It's WMD 2.0, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is, and it's unbelievable how much is being put on this. And if you really look into it, there's a lot of good reason for it. I mean, it's the American deep state and probably the UK deep state as well, and that is. We don't make anything here anymore. All we make is weapons, and we're selling a lot of them. We've already, sent $300 million worth of offensive weapons to the Ukraine, and we're looking at the Congress is debating sending another $500 million of weapons to them, and that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean that's where their bread is buttered. They've been on this Russiagate thing for years now, even when Trump was in office, and now. But let me tell you this. The reason they're going great guns with this is the only thing in America that unites conservatives and the Democrats as well, because all of these things are going to pass with huge support from both Republicans and Democrats when it comes, to voting on it. I mean, they're going to give them this money, these weapons, and all this stuff, and I'm pretty sure it'll happen in the UK as well, because
that's already happened. Not one single person demurred against the prevailing narrative in the House of Commons this week. Not one single member of Parliament.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying is exactly what's happening here. And all of them are on board with this because they know where their bread is buttered. And they're going to get this money. And here's the added benefit to this, George. If they can continue with this, just like it did with Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, North Africa, if they can get this to where it's an actual conflict and they can create chaos and disruption in that area of the world, they stand to benefit hugely because despite all their best efforts, they failed to stop the pipeline from Russia to Germany. They
did.
And
they did.
Now... That's right. Now, if they can get this hot war going over there, they may be able to convince these other European countries not to take that Russian gas and to buy it from America.
Mike, I need to cut you short just because of the hour. You could tell me about Rogan next week. Malcolm is in Edinburgh. Let's go to Edinburgh, capital city of Scotland. Go ahead, Malcolm.
George, you're looking dapper tonight, and I love your new mug. I like that.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe I'll get a few made. People can have them.
Yeah, we'll get them on the shop. George, I'm going to have a 30-second rant, and I would like to get your opinion on this, please.
Yeah.
It's about people abusing the people. Now, when I say this, is 6,000 vets in the United Kingdom. Over 50% of them in the last couple of years have been taken over by venture capitalist firms.
Vets, veterinary surgeons.
Yes. So
goodness, who knew there was such money in pooches and cats?
Well, I do because my dog's left leg had an ACL injury a couple of years ago. It cost me a couple of £1,000.
Oof.
It's now gone up to £3,000 or £4,000 because there's people in London.
I could have put it in the Clyde for you, Malcolm.
They're sitting in private equity firms, driving their Aston Martins, and they're thinking, how can we take money from the public, the poor people, the people who love their pets, and they're maximizing profits by overtaking the majority of vets throughout the United Kingdom.
Wow.
So, George, that really infuriates me. So how do you protect your working class people who owns a cat or a dog that wants to get it treated, and you've got
it's
these
a very good
capitalists in their Aston Martin.
I already knew that there was money in vets because when the Glasgow Vet School was threatened with closure when I was the Member of Parliament there, I went to see the then Minister, Robert Jackson, a Conservative minister, who happened to be a friend of mine. I had travelled in South America with him. And he said to me that you need more qualifications to become a vet than you do to become a doctor. You can get into the vet school with greater difficulty than to get into medical school. And I asked, how could that possibly be? He said that there's big money in veterinary surgery. And now you tell me that actually our local vet is owned by an American venture capitalist. My God, what is the country coming to?
George, it's disgraceful. When people go into veterinary, they go in for a reason, and that's to care for animals. And you've got these venture capitalists circling like hawks to try and pluck the bones and the money of poor people with the pets that are poorly.
Well,
I'm
glad you brought that up. I'm glad you've brought that up, Malcolm. It's very, very useful to us to know it. Last word to you. Have you got anything else you wanted to say?
No.
Thank you.
Yes, I do. Thank you in your monologue to highlight the truckers' cause, George. The mainstream media are avoiding it, and you highlight it.
Not
Thank
me.
you for that.
Not me. It's blue collar. It's working class people in action. It's what I like to see. Is Boris Johnson using Ukraine as a deliberate distraction from Partygate? 63%, 83%, 84%. It's kind of obvious. Now, I've been plugging the Liverpool showing of Killing Kelly. Tickets are almost all gone in the Hope Street Theatre. So let me move on to the next one, which is a while now. It's on the 25th of April, and it's in Oxford Town Hall, where I have had some of the best events of my life. So it is Oxford Town Hall, Monday, the 25th of April, and tickets are on sale now. And I think the flyer is on the screen for you. Now, last question of the night. In this week in 1983, in Britain, it became compulsory for drivers to wear a seatbelt. Who was the celebrity fronting the advertising campaign? My God, this is embarrassing. A. Marty Feldman. B. Jimmy Savile. C. Jeremy Irons. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George here. I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier. I've got a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Kenny's better at the singing than at the politics and the philosophy, isn't he? Okay, the embarrassing answer is that in this week in 1983, in Britain, it became compulsory for drivers to wear a seatbelt. Quite late in the day, that, wasn't it, 1983? Who was the celebrity fronting the advertising campaign? The answer was Jimmy Savile. Now, quickly moving on, my old friend, parliamentary colleague, former Conservative MP and minister, indeed, in the government of John Major. In fact, he was an MP when Jimmy Savile got that gig. Maybe he remembers it. I hope, because he was at Transport for a while, I hope he had nothing to do with it. It is, of course, Steve Norris. Steve, welcome back. You didn't give Jimmy Savile that particular gig, did you?
No. No, it was nearly a decade before I took the reins at Transport, but...
well, it would have been better if you'd kept them.
I got the answer.
It'd been better if you'd kept them, because we've now got cyclists driving down the middle of the road in London, even though we've spent billions on cycle lanes. What's that all about?
Well, it's all about a new set of advisory issues issued by the Highway Code to add to what's already an incredibly complex document. You used to think the Highway Code was fairly simple. Do you understand what traffic lights are? Do you understand what the speed limits are in various parts of the country and so on? Now it's horrendous, and it's all around this, what they call this pyramid approach, where pedestrians come top, and then cyclists, and then, I suppose, motorcyclists, and then buses and taxis, and then right at the bottom is the dear old motorist. There's some logic in that in some ways, because we do want to make sure that that we keep accidents off the road. But frankly, I think this one really has triggered something quite extraordinary, which is
certainly triggered me, Steve. I'll tell you, as someone with no, I would have, if I'd become mayor of London, there wouldn't have been a cycle lane left. But anyway, speaking of accidents, Boris Johnson is in deep trouble now, or is he?
Oh, yeah, I think he is. I think he is, for very simple reasons. He's credited with having won the Tories an 80-seat majority. Personally, I always took the view that the two people who won those 80 seats, or certainly the 30 red wall seats for the Tories, were Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer. Jeremy Corbyn, because most Labour voters support the monarchy, support the armed services, believe in their country, don't like people running it down, and simply thought that that was what Jeremy Corbyn was all about. And of course, Keir Starmer, because he told all those Labour voters who voted to leave the European Union that they were fools, they were ill-educated, probably from, sort of C2D class.
Thick northern racists.
Yes, and that he would give them another chance to get the right answer. Something, of course, that you and I know the EU is very, very keen on. But given that Boris is credited with having won that election, you have to say that right now, all the evidence is that Boris Johnson would lose that majority for the Conservatives if he remains in office. I don't personally believe in casting stones, let he who is without sin. But the reality is that Boris Johnson is now, in my view, and in the view, I think, of most reasonable people, entirely discredited. If he doesn't go now, then something else will happen, some other offence, because that's what Boris is, that's what Boris does. I worked with him quite closely when he was mayor, and I know that, for example, he really can't be bothered to read the official papers, the number one requirement of any serious minister, that he relies heavily on a lot of other people, that like some very intellectually clever people, he's lazy intellectually, knowing that he can always get away with a quip and a line and a quick scan and so on. And of course, in cases like dear Mrs. Zadari Ratcliffe, for example, now still imprisoned in Iran, it was a gift to the Iranian regime when Boris simply blurted out something that was entirely misleading and which led her into continued imprisonment. I mean, that's not even amusing at any level. But that's the man who is now Prime Minister. And, I'm afraid, I think when that happens, whether you like him or not, whether you want to give him credit for what he achieved or not, you simply have to say, you're the problem. And I remember, George, if you don't mind me saying so, that in 1990, a far greater politician of whose shoes Johnson is not fit to shine, had been leader of the party for 15 years and she'd been prime minister for 11. But MPs realised that from that point, she'd become a liability rather than an asset. And the Tory party took the necessary action. And I wonder about this current crop of MPs, whatever they are, they're of Conservatives and Labour MPs, as it happens on both sides. As you well know, they're younger, they're less experienced, they're less worldly wise, perhaps. Because as far as I can see, it's not a question of whether you like Boris Johnson or not. It's just a question of, do the Tories want to win the next election? And if they do, they have to change. And the sooner they change, the better.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to. We were both in the House when Margaret Thatcher was defenestrated, and brutal it was. It was a kind of regicide, because, as you rightly imply, she was no ordinary politician, no ordinary party leader even. This was basically like killing the Queen. And the Tories did it rather ruthlessly on the night we both recall. If that were to happen, let's play hypotheticals. What happens next? Because, you know, I've got to say, when I look along that Tory front bench, I don't see anyone who is what we Catholics call papabile, who is capable of being the Pope.
Yes, papabile is a lovely word. You and I know what it means, George.
Yeah. But nobody else, not many else.
Not many do. However, let me say, first of all, that's a really valid point, because, you know, when you look along the front bench, I do personally think there are several people who'd be perfectly capable of leading the country and doing it very competently. One, of course, is Jeremy Hunt, who I voted for last time when Boris Johnson, of course, beat him. Another, as far as I'm concerned, is Rishi Sunak. He may be young, but he's clearly extremely bright. He's very, very good with the media. And of course, I think he'd be, you know,
very, very, very rich.
Yes, but I mean, I'm hardly going to blame him for the fact that he married a very rich wife. I've been married twice. I'm always thinking of trying to marry a rich one, but sadly, you know, I love both of them. But let's not be distracted.
Let's not go there.
Yes, and then there are others. You know, I always remember that when Michael Howard, the Conservative leader in 2005, you remember this, decided to stand down after he'd lost the 2005 election to Labour. There were four candidates who everybody assumed would be the senior candidates, who were, it was Malcolm Rifkind, it was Ken Clarke, what's his name, the little chap who used to be Secretary of State for International Trade, as well, Liam Fox. Yeah. And then this chap Cameron came along and blew them all away. And succeeded. So don't rule out, for example, somebody like Tom Tugendhat, who's thrown his hat in the ring already. That's quite a brave thing to do. He's a soldier. He's very clear. He speaks his mind. He's nobody's patsy. You know,
he was also a strong Remainer. How would that work?
Well, you know, I think I no longer want to define our politics simply by Leave and Remain. I mean, I was a Leaver. Had we remained, well, then we'd have had to get on with life. I don't think I'd be still arguing the toss. And I think most people do accept now that we're out and we're not going back. So I have no problem with that. I mean, you can say that Jeremy Hunt is probably a Remainer, and yet he would be my pick. And the reason is because he would say, as any sensible person was, okay, the country made a decision, we're now out, and my job is to make sure that we make the best of it. You know, one of the most depressing things for me is that since we left the European Union, we have taken none of the advantages which clearly flow from it. Absolutely. And to me, that's a desperate failing in, of course, this Johnson-led government. He might have got us out, albeit with a few ragged edges, such as the Union and Northern Ireland. But, you know, the fact is, where's the idea of being the Singapore of Europe? Where's the idea of creating a low-tax economy that's all about inviting, you know, global players to focus on the UK? Why do we sign up to Biden's 15% corporation tax when, floor? When, as far as I'm concerned, we should be outbidding Ireland to make companies come to us, create employment, create decent, you know, well-paid jobs. I haven't seen any of that, and that's why I would go for anybody who will restore the integrity and the respect that any party needs if it wants to, be in government. Right now, I think people have more respect for the integrity of the leader of the Labour Party. It may be the most boring of men and the most trite of speech makers, but nonetheless, compared to Johnson, the man is a saint.
Well, that is fascinating, I must say. Thank you very much indeed, Steve Norris, for joining us, as always. Let me go over to the control room because there's breaking news on the Maxwell films on Patreon. I have no idea what this is, I promise you. Simon, what's happened?
Well, George, you mentioned earlier that obviously the Patreon is now up and running and it's going to be a living biography of everything that you've ever done, all the way back through your tapes. But one of the things that we've been working on, that we talked about earlier, is this Maxwell the Monster film, which is eventually going to be released as a podcast. We were going to release it at 10 p.m. tonight, but it's split into 3 parts. So if you actually look, part 1's now available, playing live on Patreon.
Oh, you've got it on now, OK.
So it's so easy to do. If you go to patreon.com/George Galloway, you'll see the page, create a profile, and then you can support us. And it's a £4 support profit. So you'll get everything that we make for just £4 a month. It's a brilliant way to support us. Another way that you
everything that we make, and we're going to be making a lot.
We're going to be making so much stuff. It is literally, we're practically giving it away for what we're offering it for. There's absolutely, I've been inundated with requests on what are we having, how can I watch it? It's on the app of Patreon or on the webpage.
I've got people asking me what my discs are going to be on my Desert Island Discs thing.
Oh,
thanks, Simon. Simon, just because of the hour, I need to press on, yeah? Thank you very much indeed. Richard in Manchester on Robert Maxwell. Go ahead, Rich.
For having me on the show. I know a little bit about this thing that happened, because I had a beautiful holiday apartment overlooking the harbour in Los Cristianos on Tenerife,
where his body was brought ashore.
It was Ghislaine Maxwell, the boat was called, and he apparently lent £750 million, I think I'm right in saying that, of the pension fund of the old age pensioners or whatever of the Daily Mirror. I think that was around about the amount.
$750 million, that's exactly right, yeah.
Oh, that's good. The memory's still pretty good then.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when he wanted it back, he got in trouble himself. When he wanted it back, he put he put a lot of pressure on the Israelis to get it back to him quicker than they said they were going to. So they sent the coordinates, and the yacht met, I don't know, 200 miles out in the Atlantic from Los Cristianos, and he set sail, and whoever else they reckon, and I think Ghislaine actually came out and said it at the time, that he had been murdered.
She still thinks that, yeah. She still thinks that he was pushed, that he never would have jumped, and on that I agree with her also. He could have fallen because he had a habit of micturating over balconies, down onto the street below, over the edge of the yacht and so on. That is a possibility. But as you'll see in the podcast, on the balance of probabilities, I believe that he was murdered.
I think that is exactly what she said. From the ship itself to people on the... Somebody shouted at one of the reporters, "What do you think?" And that's what she said. But more importantly, they sent a plane from, I think it was Madrid, to take his body in the first 24 hours after the fiscal authorities had done a quick post-mortem. And when they tried to put the coffin on the plane, they couldn't get it in because the doors weren't big enough. So they had a delay of about 6 hours to get another plane down, and took him to Jerusalem. And there he was buried in the Mount of Olives.
I visited that very grave, but not to lay flowers on it. Thanks for that, Rich. Mark in North Carolina on Ukraine. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, what's going on, George? Hey, George, one thing about all this, by the time this is over, I think we may see the end of NATO, and that would be a good thing. The Durand, right? The 2 guys on the Durand?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever had them in the show.
I have, yeah.
They've been going over this pretty good. And they think Russia, basically playing judo, using judo, kind of political judo.
Yeah.
And letting basically finally letting NATO destroy itself, because most of these European countries don't want to get involved in this thing now. They know they couldn't stand up against Russia.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the U.S., I don't think the U.S. would have two chances, slim and none, of defeating or even standing up to the Russian army in that region or world.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the army of today that we've got, cross-dressers and all that stuff. Wouldn't have, you know what I mean? And incompetent generals like Billy and Austin. So.
Well, look, I'll tell you what, Mark. If I won the lottery, I'd spend a significant part of it on a Europe-wide campaign, no to NATO, to try to persuade people to withdraw from this disastrous alliance that could be leading us over the cliff in the service of the United States. And I believe I could win that campaign. But I'm not going to win the lottery because I don't do it. Mark, thanks for the call. I've got a legend on the line, so I need to say goodbye to you. It's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. It's a bit of a generalization, this call.
Yeah.
I enjoyed Farron from Washington.
She's wonderful,
Yeah, she was straight to the point. She was refreshing, clear. And I suppose this is what I'm going to say. I actually like men, but I think women have got more common sense. It's men that do the war, the weapons, and I think more women should speak on your show, George.
Well, me too. Women callers are prioritized, but I can't conjure them up. If they don't call, I can't put them on. But I've got to tell you, Norma, I profoundly disagree with you. Not because I don't love women, of course I do. Not because I'm not surrounded by highly capable women. In the case of my own wife, much more capable than me. It's not to do with that. But I heard all this stuff right throughout the 1980s. If we had more women MPs, if we had more women ministers, there would be less wars and all the rest. And when it came to the Iraq War, Norma, you'll remember the Blair babes. Tony Blair had, I think it was 101 women MPs. Only 3 of them opposed the Iraq War.
Yeah, I don't really mean that. You see, we've got groups of men. You've got Bristol City and Cardiff. Okay, Bristol City trash the toilets in Cardiff because they lose. Then Cardiff lose to them and they trash the toilets. Women don't do that, do they? Mine's just a generalization. I know what you're saying about this women's lib and all that. I'm certainly not that sort of person.
Well, I never suspected for a minute that you were that sort of person. But I just mean they may not trash toilets, but they are more than ready to trash countries. They're more than ready to kill people. I lived through Margaret Thatcher. I saw the devastation that she brought to my people. Of course, she was good for some people, but she was extremely bad for my people. I have never forgotten that. And when I look at others, Kamala Harris and so on, I have no doubt that they would have no compunction of wiping out hundreds of thousands of people, even though they might not trash the toilets in a football stadium. You feel me?
I do, George, I do. My life's a bit sheltered now, and we don't get out much because old age brings its problems. And I just like hearing some refreshing women.
Well, Farron was definitely that, but you are a legend for a reason. People wait for your call every week, and they're distressed if they don't get it. Thanks, Norma. In Bristol, Andy Mulls on the poll says, arguments to tarnish Boris, getting more extreme, ridiculous and desperate by the day. We're learning more about the commentators. than we are of Boris currently. Jack Tulloch says you can't compare Ukraine with Partygate. One is a war zone, the other is a couple of drinks. Grow the F up. Jack Milburn says, listen, Vlad, please invade. It'll be a good distraction for me, and I'll give you first shout for Buckingham Palace. Good chap. And Saad says the result is clear, that Johnson wanted Ukraine as a deliberate distraction in order to cover his defeat and make himself a hero like the criminal Tony Blair. And Nigel says, I wonder if that's Farage. Maybe, but Partygate isn't about Boris. It's about Brexit and how to get us back into the EU. Careful what you wish for. And Reckless Abandon says, what is the worst thing you could do to get Russia very, very angry? Train a bunch of neo-Nazis and get them to murder ethnic Russians across the Ukrainian border. Wow. Powerful stuff. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your particular missive, but I will read them before I retire this evening. I've got another legend on the line. He sent me to sleep last time. It's Kenny in Acton. Go ahead, Kenny.
The thing you can say about capitalism is that although it produces inequality, it also produces wealth. And all the other systems don't, they just produce inequality.
Kenny, give us a song,
am I still
for
on the
God's
show?
sake.
Am I still on air?
You're still on air, but I fell asleep again.
Oh, God. Right, okay. I wanted to talk about this, the idea that feminists have called the patriarchy, because I've been on a few dates with some high-earning women recently.
Good for you.
So I took a woman...
Does your wife know?
I'm single, man. Come on. I took a woman to the Tanner & Co in Bermondsey to a Burns night on Tuesday night.
Okay.
And she was the director of a company earning £90,000 a year. That's triple what I'm earning.
Okay.
And she put it to me that because of that we're incompatible. So my idea, if feminists really want to overthrow this patriarchy, which will never happen in my opinion, is the reason it exists, the gender pay gap, is because men are financially incentivized to earn more than women because that's what women are attracted to. So if feminists want to start overthrowing the patriarchy and close the gender pay gap, they need to start dating men who earn less than them, therefore financially disincentivizing the patriarchy, the gender pay gap. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But what's all that got to do with Elvis?
Well, because he sung a song along similar lines that, you know, money doesn't buy happiness in a relationship.
I don't remember
like
that song. Remind me.
Okay. It's called True Love Travels on a Gravel Road, and I'd like to sing it now.
Go ahead.
Okay. How many girls choose cotton dress roads when they could have satins and lace and stand by her man never once let him shade touch her face? How many hearts could live through all the winters we've known and still not be cold? Oh, true love travels on a gravel road.
Kenny.
Love is a stranger and hearts are in danger on through streets paved with gold. Oh, true love travels on a gravel road.
Kenny, I've got a home to go to. Thank you very much indeed for that call. Poll result. Wow. 1,500 people voted. That's big for a second poll. Is Boris Johnson using Ukraine as a deliberate distraction from Partygate? Yes, 62%. No, 38%. Well, it's been marvellous for me. He said nothing of subsequence all evening. See you next week. God bless.